Hello, Napoleon. You're quite good at turning me on.
You should probably ignore that.
One thing the ninja's famous for, I want to point out, is what is known as a death touch. The ability to hit someone, leave no bruise, no mark whatsoever, and yet kill them.
This sounds like a James Bond movie, you realize.
Well, the ninjas were the James Bonds of Japan.
Kept you waiting, huh? In the world of video games, Hideo Kojima is an auteur. That's French for pretentious. One of the most recognizable and successful designers of all time, he has made a career out of ripping off more movies than the Pirate Bay. His level of stardom is such that it affords him the creative freedom to design characters with names like Die Hard Man, or a female soldier who looks more like a stripper that wandered into an NRA convention, and somehow he keeps getting work. Kojima's best title is arguably Metal Gear Solid 3. I say arguably as anyone who's allowed to use the stove unsupervised knows the real answer is MGS1, and I'll fight you if you try and tell me any different. But in a universe filled with vampire soldiers, cyber ninjas, clones of clones of clones, and telepathic gremlins or whatever, MGS3 is a standout title simply for having an actual well-thought character arc for its main antagonist, the boss. I will now ask Napoleon to attempt the Sisyphean task of summing up a Kojima storyline in 2 paragraphs or less.
The boss is a legendary soldier who, in the crazy world of Hideo Kojima, was pivotal in winning the Battle of Normandy for the Allies and turning the tide of World War II. She's the mentor and friend of your character, Naked Snake, who is also known as Big Boss, and not to be confused with Solid Snake, who is a clone of Big Boss, or Liquid Snake, who is the brother of Solid Snake and is also a clone of Big Boss, but evil and also dead, but lives on in the surgically reattached hand of Revolver Ocelot, who was the boss's illegitimate child, and ultimately forms a terrorist group called the Sons of Liberty with Solidus Snake, not to be confused with Solid Snake, because Solidus Snake is actually the President of the United States, who is also a clone of Big Boss.
Snake, are you okay? Snake? Snake!
Okay, so while the plot of the Metal Gear universe has more shocking twists than a dominatrix specializing in ball torture, to cut a ridiculous story short, this legendary American soldier, the boss, defects to the USSR during the Cold War, and not the modern-day Cold War, the classic one you remember from Call of Duty Black Ops. You track her down, kill her, and save the day. But only afterwards is it revealed that the boss never actually defected. She had been ordered by her superiors to defect, to get on the inside of the USSR and stop the development of a very anime type of nuclear weapon. The boss was so far undercover that in death, she sacrificed her name and reputation in service to her country. The public would never know that in truth, this traitor, who traded everything for which the United States stands for communal farming and informing on your neighbour, had died as one of the greatest American patriots. Frank Dukes is a soldier, spy, sexual dynamo, and greatest martial artist of all time. He's the man who gave us his true life story in the form of 1998's greatest movie, Bloodsport. And I know what you're thinking right now, and the answer is, yeah, believe it or not, Bloodsport is allegedly a true story.
Meet Frank Dukes, the first American to win the Kumite, a deadly martial arts competition where the only rule is to win.
He's been the subject of innumerable documentaries, interviews and articles, but as the years pass, Dukes has become somewhat of a laughingstock, as claim after claim of his is debunked. But the more I learn about Dukes, the more I begin to wonder, is he less Solid Snake and more the boss? A legendary soldier whose actions were so covert that he is doomed to be considered a fraud thanks to the fact that his work can never be revealed publicly. I mean, aside from that one time he wrote a book detailing them in great length, but aside from that, this video aims to answer the question, is Frank Dukes the secret man the greatest American ninja, elite soldier, CIA spook, child slavery abolitionist, Kumite-winning patriot of all time. Without a good backstory, there's no compelling reason for any hero or villain to exist. Frodo wants to destroy the One Ring out of an innate desire to rid Middle-earth of the evil that has corrupted his beloved Uncle Bilbo. Batman's parents are dead, and he never shuts up about it. And Jeff Monson sprang to life as if from a genie's lamp out of a deep desire to see people fornicate without any financial strings attached. Frank Duke's origin story begins in 1956 in the ice-blasted, frigid hellscape of Toronto, Canada. But it's really boring, so let's skip ahead to when the interesting shit starts. In 1996, Dukes wrote this: The Secret Man, an ancient tome that chronicles his life, his loves, and all the top-secret missions he blundered his way through en route to becoming the world's greatest soldier spy martial arts CIA Green Beret karate champion of the world. For research purposes, and also because I paid 30 whole euros for the literary equivalent of a Creed greatest hits album and want to get my money's worth, I'll be basing a lot of my observations on Frank's life and deeds from his very own autobiographical fanfiction. Like most kids, Duke started training in martial arts as a way out of being bullied. A skinny Jewish kid living in a rough neighborhood in California, Dukes wanted to learn to defend himself, but after his first loss at a judo tournament, we almost lost the greatest martial arts career of all time before it had even begun. In the locker room post-tournament, a despondent Duke struggled to hold back his tears of rage and frustration and considered giving up altogether. It's at this point that anyone who has seen the other chronicle of the life and times of Dukes, Bloodsport, will notice a significant diverging of his origin mythos. In Bloodsport, Dukes is introduced to the world of martial arts after his gang of pizza-faced preteen hoodlums attempt to steal a sword from the home of legendary martial arts instructor Senzo Tiger Tanaka. And not just any sword, this is the Kumite sword, a priceless, irreplaceable loot drop you get after beating like 300 other guys in unarmed combat. But in The Secret Man, this never happens. Senzo Tanaka ghost dads his way into the locker room, materializing like the referee in IK Plus and offering the kind of wisdom that only stereotypical, borderline mystical old Asian men can. And while I get that stealing a priceless artifact that Senzo probably picked up in Narita Airport's duty-free section is a bit more Hollywood than him kinda creepily appearing in the boys' locker room.
I see you working with the young kids. Do you have a favorite kind of spot for the younger ones?
It's just one of many inconsistencies we'll find in the Frank Duke story. After their vaguely creepy locker room introduction, Dukes began his ninja training with Tanaka. But for a legendary martial arts instructor, Senzo Tanaka is more elusive than the ghost of D.B. Cooper. Despite his status as an alleged Kumite winner and head of the Koga Yamabushi school of ninjutsu, Tanaka is more underground than the average sub-pop artist. Dukes is the only martial artist to ever claim to have trained with him.
Shidoshi Tanaka trained me.
What's the whole up?
And despite being a supposedly world-famous martial artist, there is not a single dojo, school or cardio kickboxing class affiliated with him. Finding information on Tanaka has practically become its own cottage industry, with people making hour-long videos and digging through more complex lineages than Genghis Khan just to try and prove this man actually existed.
However, I can prove, because of your last episode with Michael Bisping, that Senzo Tanaka is absolutely a real person.
One of the things you'll notice about Dukes if you do even surface-level digging is his obsession with James Bond.
This sounds like a James Bond movie, you realize.
Well, the ninjas were the James Bonds of Japan.
People inspire me at that time.
Well, one was inspiration was Sean Connery in the James Bond series that fed my ego. You're a young man, you know, you see a guy, oh, he's getting all the girls, fancy cars, you know, adventure, excitement, never loses. And so that, in my visualization, has said, well, that's who I want to be when I grow up.
Written his own biography entitled The Secret Man. I want you to meet a real-life James Bond, folks, Frank Dukes. Come on, Frank. There he is. Oh, my gosh, he's got a Bond girl. How are you? Good to see you. How you doing? Come on in. I think the man is going for a martini in the old Bond fashion with a Bond girl. Shaken, not stirred.
If you're a spy, what are you doing on TV telling everyone you're a spy? The idea of being a spy is that your life is secret and nobody knows about it. So what is this?
One place you can find Senzo Tanaka is in the James Bond movie You Only Live Twice. In it, a man named Senzo Tiger Tanaka commands an army of ninjas. Dukes explained this bizarre coincidence by stating that despite being more underground than the fucking sandworms of Arrakis, somehow Ian Fleming had heard all about Tanaka and based his Bond villain on the real-life Senzo. It's taken 30 years of digging just to verify that yes, there was a man named Senzo Tanaka who lived and died in California at roughly the same times as Dukes claims. Tanaka came from an area of Japan called Kumamoto, which has historical links to a practice called Yamabushi, which is indeed very similar sounding to Koga Yamabushi, the branch of ninjutsu Dukes claims he trained. But before any Dukes fans among you break out the champagne and hand lotion, the only problem is, Yamabushi is literally a form of meditation and mountain worshipping practiced by monks of that region.
山伏っていうのはそうですね、修験道は法的な考えがミックスされて、できた宗教なんですけども、まあ山伏っていうのはその山に伏してというふうに要する修験道の、坊さんと言ったらいいか行者。
Not a single mountain hugger interviewed here was capable of performing the dim mak, or even aware of what a dim mak is. In 1980, Frank wrote a manuscript titled Ninja, The Untold Story. It's 160 pages of ninja fanfiction, yet somehow manages to be more painfully dull than having a limb amputated with a spoon. Dukes does, however, spend a significant allotment of the story performing literary fellatio on Senzo Tanaka. The list of Tanaka's accomplishments are truly inspirational. Let's take a look at a few examples and try to rate their credibility. At age 16, he took part in the Russo-Japan War. The 16-year-old Tanaka killed enough high-ranking Russian officers to make Joseph Stalin feel inadequate. Famous Russian lunatic Rasputin prophesied the coming of Senzo Tanaka. As it was prophesied, Tanaka ninja'd his way into the court of Tsar Nicholas II, beheaded his mistress, and left her head in his bed. Tanaka pulled a lethal weapon and was kicked out of the Japanese intelligence services during World War II for being a loose cannon who didn't do things by the book. He moved to San Francisco where he ninja'd the fuck out of the entire Chinese mafia. According to Dukes, Senzo was regarded as the most famous ninja of his day, which seems about as useful as being the best guitarist in Nickelback or the hottest man on the Isle of Lesbos. The most interesting thing about this manuscript, once you cast aside all its bullshit and flim-flammery, is not what it tells you, but what it fails to tell you. Despite listing everything from high-profile assassinations to the heft and texture of his bowel movements, not once does Frank mention that Senzo was a Kumite champion, which seems like a glaring oversight given the importance of the Kumite in Frank and Senzo's lives. Is it possible that Senzo Tanaka really was a legendary ninja and part of a lineage stretching back 40 generations? Yes, but unlikely. There is, however, a far more plausible scenario. The real-life Tanaka would have been a 70 or even 80-year-old man when he met Frank Dukes, and as old men are wont to do, he likely told a young and impressionable boy stories. Tales of his homeland, where an ancient clan of priests offer silent prayers to a mountain deity who returns nothing but a cavernous silence of its own, and whispers of warriors unseen, hiding in the hills, were used to quell unruly children. Behave yourself, or the invisible warriors, the shadow dancers of the sacred mountain, will come and take you away. And maybe Frank enjoyed those stories just a little too much. Xenophanes was an ancient Greek philosopher who posited the notion that if horses and oxen could learn to draw, they would draw the gods as horses and oxen. If Frank Dukes drew a picture of God, he would be wearing black pajamas and swinging a katana.
Ninja means someone whose spirit and skill is sharper than the edge of a blade.
Regardless of how Frank met Senzo, theirs was a love that bloomed on the battlefield. Senzo's nephews eventually got bored of ninja LARPing and went to do fun teenager things like squandering the gift of youth and dry humping. With no other competition for his affections, Frank was free to bask in Senzo's full attention, and bask he did. According to Dukes' ancient ninja manuscript, Tanaka knew he was dealing with not just any teenager, but with the true heir to 40 generations of ninja cosplay. It's safe to say Senzo picked up a real ninja vibe coming off this kid, which may partially explain why, between the ages of 14 to 16, Senzo's training crossed over the border into full-on child endangerment, as Frank was made to do live fighting with real bladed weapons, fought a green beret, and had to have stakes strapped to his legs and get chased by a hungry Akita. So after 2 whole years of training,
what's the whole up?
He took someone else's teenage son on an unsupervised trip to, and I quote, the legendary ninja land of Masuda, which is odd as you would likely expect them to go to Kumamoto, seeing as that's where 40 fucking generations of Senzo's ninja great-grandparents lived, but whatever, maybe his ninja teleport abilities were a little off that day.
So, what is this?
At Masuda, the 16-year-old Frank learns every single ninja technique in the fucking ninja book, and then challenges the entire Koga clan for the right to be called ninja. I'm not making this up or exaggerating, this is legitimately all in Frank's manuscript. A 16-year-old Canadian challenges an entire clan of ninjas in the middle of a ninja village for the right to become a ninja. And again I quote, the boy's abilities shocked and pleased the ninja community, and he was awarded in front of the entire Koga clan the title of ninja. Having mastered the ninja art before he had even mastered growing facial hair, Dukes moved on to the next arc of the Frank Dukes cinematic universe, his military career. My name is Frank Dukes. I was in Vietnam. I hold the record for most Vietnamese killed with a single roundhouse kick. It's 56. That was in 1993 and they still haven't let me back into the country. Frank's accomplishments as the greatest Canadian ninja are only matched by his military record.
Tell that dipshit to get fucked.
Dukes is the owner of more medals, ribbons and awards than the average Call of Duty lobby. If you can name a country, there's a better than average chance Frank has fought there, or conducted a covert operation, or maybe just banged a really hot chick there.
Ain't nothing like a piece of pussy.
Because if the secret man is to be believed, Frank Dukes is slinging more pipe than legendary sexual hobgoblin Ishida Kim. Dukes is an awardee of the Navy Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star, Distinguished Service Cross, Navy Marine Corps Medal, Purple Heart, Medal of Honor, and Medal of Honor Allied Assault. In an issue of Black Belt magazine from 1980, Dukes revealed that he even received awards for his knife fighting skills in active combat in Southeast Asia.
Y'all take a good look at this lump of shit.
His missions were so covert that even his awarding of the Medal of Honor had to be done in a secret ceremony.
All of us have taken an oath that we cannot get too much into the details by reason of the fact of security concerns, but he was into special operations and then, of course, operating with other government agencies.
He's a Vietnam veteran who conducted secret missions in Laos as part of Operation Sanction. In a tale straight out of an 80s Nam movie, Dukes was the sole survivor of his entire team, though he didn't exactly escape unscathed. He was lucky to make it out alive, limping across the border into Thailand after receiving several bayonet wounds in his stomach and shrapnel in his back.
Everybody gotta die sometime, Red.
He worked for the CIA, NSA, FBI, and NordVPN. Speaking of NordVPN, fuck NordVPN. Frank's military and intelligence career is shrouded in more mystery than the pyramids of Giza. In order to try and make sense of it all, we need to start at the beginning.
Bob, I got a bad feeling on this one, alright? I got a bad feeling.
My name is Frank Dukes. I was in Vietnam. There was no parade for me when I came home. Nobody called me a hero, aside from the articles I wrote about myself. But life isn't gonna just hand you the Medal of Honor, so I awarded it to myself. What we do know for indisputable fact, thanks to a Freedom of Information request from militaryphony.com, is that in 1975, at the age of 18 and only 2 years after becoming King of the Ninjas, Frank enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserves. He attained the rank of Lance Corporal, and his primary duty for his entire military career is listed as wireman, which is someone who repairs communications equipment. His active duty only lasted 130 days, ending in October of 1975. The lines begin to blur when Dukes himself supplies a copy of his discharge papers, which show Basic Intelligence Man listed as his primary duty rather than wireman. This was investigated by Military Phony, who were able to confirm that Frank did indeed have basic intelligence training, but the kind of advanced intelligence training one might need to get into the CIA or FBI is nowhere to be seen. The reveal of Frank as having basic intelligence training might seem like a rare W for him, as it lends credibility to his tales of special forces, Green Beret, James Bond, covert missions, and licking strawberry jam off a woman's foot in the middle of a restaurant, which is actually a thing in his book, and I swear to God I'm not making up something as stomach-churning as that. But once we dig a little deeper, things fall apart faster than a Tony v. Habib main event. The first and most glaringly obvious structural flaw in Frank's House of Lies are his Vietnam stories. Numerous articles describe him as a Vietnam veteran, and even in his own book, he describes someone as an old buddy from Nam. But unless his recruitment office was a heavily modified DeLorean, it's impossible for Frank to be a Vietnam veteran, given that the war ended in 1973 and he enlisted in 1975. While GIs were busy dying face down in the mud, Frank was face down in Senzo's backyard, LARPing as Ninja Jesus. When this was pointed out, Frank immediately cast Reflect, claiming that he never said he was in Vietnam, but Southeast Asia as part of a special operations group on secret missions after the war had ended. But the actual special operations group that operated in Southeast Asia, known as the MACV SOG, had been disbanded by 1975. Duke's status as a permanent resident in the biggest land of make-believe since Middle-earth was confirmed when his military records showed that he had never left the United States at any point during his service. The next sandcastle to soccer kick was that of Frank's medals. The Medal of Honor is the highest award in the United States military, yet it was awarded to Frank in a top-secret hush-hush ceremony so as not to blow his cover. Which, if true, would likely be the one and only time in history that the US military has ever awarded any medal of any description, let alone its top honour, in secret. The military aren't like the fucking Dragonborn, covertly sneaking their highest honour into someone's back pocket while attempting to pickpocket them. Sheldon Lettich, director of Bloodsport, dim-macked Frank's Medal of Honor claims in a particularly brutal fashion. Frank also used to tell me, and just about everyone he spoke to, that he had participated in secret missions for the CIA and the US military, and that he had won the Medal of Honor for his heroism. He even showed me the medal, which he had supposedly been awarded by the president. Years afterwards, when numerous people began questioning his stories, he stopped claiming that he won the medal, and then began claiming that he'd never told anyone he won it. He even tried to convince me that he'd never told me he won the medal, or that he'd even shown it to me, but by then his entire house of cards had collapsed, and nearly everyone knew he was just a delusional daydreamer and a big bullshitter. It's also pretty important to note that Frank claimed he was awarded the Purple Heart, which is given to soldiers injured in battle, yet no mention of the injuries or the medal appear in his records. Without those, it would make it impossible for a veteran to receive the proper care from the Veterans Administration when they're discharged. Hence, there is a very good reason why these medals aren't awarded in secret or scrubbed from a soldier's DD-214. The only record of Dukes being injured while on active duty was described in the book Stolen Valor, when Frank apparently fell off a truck he was painting, which might be secret code for assassinating a battalion of Viet Cong using only the dim mak, but is more than likely just Frank falling off a truck. The covert operation in which Frank allegedly received his Purple Heart, Operation Sanction, is also about as realistic as my chances with Valentina Shevchenko. Oh shit, this is really happening. Play it cool, play it cool. Don't mention the spin kick, don't mention the spin kick. Hey girl. What was with that spin kick? Operation Wolf has more credibility than Operation Sanction. No one has ever heard of or found any records pertaining to Operation Sanction outside of Frank's big book of erotic military fanfiction. Oh, and Frank's claim that he won awards for his knife fighting skills? Yeah, those awards don't exist. The military is about as likely to give you an award for lightsaber skills as they are for knife fighting skills. But what about all those Vietnam photos and footage of Frank? They're from a short movie directed by Sheldon Lettich called Firefight. But if his medals are all make-believe, explain this photo, Napoleon, you draft-dodging hippie, I hear you say, probably. When it was pointed out that Frank is wearing a mixture of Marine and Army medals in this photo, which is something that would never happen, he backpedaled and claimed this isn't actually a photo of him in uniform, it's simply a hilarious Halloween costume. So in amongst all the sexy cats, sexy nurses, and whatever the fuck this monstrosity is, Frank was there in sexy full dress uniform. My name is Frank Dukes, and as it turns out, I actually wasn't in Vietnam. I was, however, injured by a standard military issue M880 4x4 truck, possibly because it was a heavily disguised Viet Cong transformer. At this point, Frank's military claims have seen more poked holes than a teenage disco. A simple Freedom of Information request to see his DD-214 dropped the hammer of dawn on the vast majority of his claims, as one single piece of paper proves that he never left the US and was never awarded any medals. And without that, all Frank has is some communications repair training and a budding career at Radio Shack. But what of Frank's other claims? That of being the titular secret man, the CIA's finest operative.
Значит, он мне, конечно, конкретно он не рассказывал, но так, в общем, говорил, что это человек с большой буквы, так он его называл. Человек с большой буквы, необычайной силы, воли, характера стойкого, но целеустремленный, такой, который может выполнить эту задачу, потому что это обычный человек не в состоянии, ему это не под силу, ни физически, ни интеллектуально, это должен быть.
In 1996, Frank detailed his life's work for the CIA in his magnum opus, The Secret Man, a novel that aims for James Bond but lands squarely on Navy SEAL copy pasta.
You think you can get away with saying that shit to me over the internet? Think again, fucker.
And at the risk of turning this video into a book review, I'm about to review this book, because if my life has to be made marginally worse by its existence, then so does yours. The Secret Man is a 316-page Jason Bourne fanfic written by someone who's only ever seen the one with Hawkeye in it.
So unpredictable, I gotta tell you.
In The Secret Man, Frank comes across like Forrest Gump with a military fetish. Somehow, Frank just happens to be present at all of the most incredible moments in covert ops history. By the end, I was almost expecting him to make an appearance at the Shadow Moses incident. If even 1/10 of this book is true, then Frank is legitimately the most badass human on the planet.
You're fucking dead, kid. I can be anywhere, anytime, and I can kill you in over 700 ways, and that's just with my bare hands.
The Secret Man's exploits contain, but are not limited to, Frank gets recruited into the CIA at age 19 in a public restroom. He hunts a serial killer who is in league with a big restaurant to murder street children because they were begging outside and made the restaurants look bad. Tracks down a Russian bioweapon that targets people based on their race. Is made a captain in the Russian army. Uses sleeping gas on someone's dog. Licks strawberry jam off a woman's foot in the middle of a restaurant. Gets into a deadly shootout with undercover KGB agents in downtown LA. Sells his kumite sword to save the lives of a ship full of orphaned kids who were kidnapped by pirates. Travels the globe meeting sketchy underworld characters in dive bars to shake them down for information. Blows up a fuel dump while fighting communists in Nicaragua. Blows up a chemical weapons plant in Iraq. And spends 3 days in a hotel room banging the hottest woman you can possibly imagine. You know who I'm talking about. That woman that you're obsessed with. You follow her on Instagram, where you like every single photo she posts, occasionally getting the courage to comment, "Looking good," after you've had a couple of beers, and then spend the next day with the nervous shits, worrying about whether or not it was a good idea. Well, now picture her, Frank Dukes, an unlimited room service strawberry jam, locked in a hotel room for 3 days. 3 whole days.
All I can tell you is I'm not the type of guy who kisses and tells, and I took an oath, and I plan on obeying that oath.
The Secret Man gives you more ridiculousness to unpack than a joke shop warehouse. And if you don't know what a joke shop is, see, in the 1980s we didn't have jokes of our own, so we bought jokes from actual physical shops, but that's not important right now. What is important is that literally every one of those claims, from the strawberry jam incident to rescuing orphans from pirates, are all true stories. Allegedly. But most of these stories fall apart under even the slightest bit of scrutiny. I can't find a single report of a fatal shootout between the FBI and undercover KGB agents in downtown LA in broad daylight, despite the fact that it would have caused an international incident and sounds like the prologue for Red fucking Dawn. But I guess it was just too covert. And unless the Kumite sword is made from a solid gold unicorn horn glued to a copy of Half-Life 3, most Somali pirates wouldn't trade a ship full of valuable orphans for one. Like the majority of Frank's life, the tales found within The Secret Man are ridiculous to the point of being a middle finger to your intelligence. But Frank dismisses the lack of evidence to back up any of his whimsical bullshit by saying, "It was a secret." The Secret Man commits the cardinal sin of any book. It's more painful to read than a eulogy for a beloved pet. For a globe-trotting tale of espionage, sex and secret missions, I spent most of my time reading this book fighting a covert war of my own against sleep. Putting all of Frank's bullshit aside for a second, if The Secret Man was an Andy McNab novel, it would probably be one of the better ones, which is what we call damning with faint praise. The best part of The Secret Man is, unsurprisingly, the part you don't have to read. Midway through the most insane narrative outside of a Sutter Kane novel, Frank gives us photographic evidence of his life as an even hornier James Bond. It starts with photos of him breaking boards and doing a death touch on an inanimate object before moving on to photos of his covert ops, which look suspiciously like stock photos of military operations. Photos so small that I could realistically claim they're photos of me on a secret operation to destroy the You'd Be Surprised master tapes, and you'd have a pretty tough time disproving it. The one photo where Frank is clearly visible, titled as Down in the Trenches in 1983, also looks suspiciously like a still from the short movie Firefight. But the best is saved for last, when we're introduced to Frank, the chameleon, master of disguise. Everything from wearing sunglasses and a cheap wig, to wearing a fake mustache over your real mustache, to puffing your cheeks out a bit, are all CIA-sanctioned field disguises for use by the elite covert op on the go. After publication, secret agents were crawling out of the woodwork to distance themselves from Frank Dukes. In August of 1996, Soldier of Fortune magazine published an article about Dukes and the Secret Man, brutally titled Full Mental Jacket. In the literary equivalent of being pulled apart by horses, Soldier of Fortune spoke to a number of people Dukes claimed were covert ops workmates of his and systematically destroyed any lingering shred of credibility Dukes may have had. Actual real-life, non-fantasy SEAL Team Commander Larry W. Simmons was talked into writing the foreword for the book, as both he and Dukes had the same literary agent, but upon publication, Simmons tried to have his name removed from it. He said, "As soon as I read the first few pages, I knew I'd been deceived into lending credibility to a fraudulent endeavour. He is not an American warrior, he is a con man." Dukes also made claims about General John Singlob, saying they had met at a Covert Ops Expo in 1993. And as a brief aside here, having an expo for Covert Ops like it's Comic-Con with night vision goggles seems a bit counterproductive for people trying to keep a low profile, but whatever. Singlob claimed to have never even met Frank and said, "You know, it's an insult to your intelligence, on the subject of special operations, to think that this guy Dukes could say he's involved in these things." Singlob also described the book as virtually a complete fabrication. He had his lawyers call the book's publisher and demanded it be removed from publication. Robert Gates, then deputy of the CIA, said, "I never heard of this guy, and no one I know in the intelligence community ever heard of him." And in an unusual move for the CIA, they made a public statement denouncing any links between them and Dukes. CIA spokesman Mark Mansfield said, "Mr. Dukes' book is sheer fantasy. He was never employed by or affiliated with the CIA."
So, what is this?
When Soldier of Fortune contacted Dukes to ask for clarification of the events of his book, Dukes claimed he couldn't answer any questions because it would endanger him and his family, despite the fact that he had just written a 316-page book that spilled more confidential stories than a teenager's diary. The intelligence community dismissed The Secret Man as a work of pretty low-effort fanfiction, and Dukes himself as a complete charlatan. But as always, Frank was able to maintain that this was just the CIA and the military denying his existence because that's just how secret he was. Frank would eventually claim that he had never said he was employed by the CIA, despite, stating that he was the CIA's finest covert operative right on the front cover of his fucking book, and doing interviews where he talked about that one time where he was employed by the CIA.
And how long did you work for the CIA?
I worked directly for William Casey from 1981 to 87.
Frank's intelligence career can be defined entirely by its stunning lack of intelligence. When Frank Dukes finally shuffles off this mortal coil and goes to that great kumite in the sky, I sincerely hope that his legacy won't be that of half-baked military fanfiction and sub-Austin Powers level James Bond rip-offs. Because despite his proclivity for spewing more bullshit than a malfunctioning slurry tank, Frank gave us the greatest gift anyone could have bestowed upon martial arts fans: Bloodsport. It's time to talk about the
What's the whole up?
For years the rumours have circulated. Those with an ear to the ground have heard fantastic tales of an invisible organisation. An organisation that sponsors an international, no-holds-barred tournament, pitting dedicated martial artists of all arts against each other in bare-knuckle kumite.
In November of 1980, Black Belt magazine published an article with a little-known karate instructor called Kumite, a learning experience. The first sign that this was not your run-of-the-mill interview was the disclaimer that while Black Belt felt confident running the article, they were unable to verify many of the details of the instructor's fantastical tales. Tales of shadowy organizations that, once every 5 years, held a top-secret, invitation-only, bare-knuckle competition to determine who the world's deadliest martial artist was.
A lot of people liken it to a human cockfight. You've got to understand that Asia is lined with one secret society after another. And that's probably why the event has been kept secret for so long.
Fights could be won only by submission, KO, or death. That little-known instructor's name was Strength Fighter. No, I'm just kidding. It was Dukes. It was Frank Dukes. The article was the world's introduction to what Frank called the kumite. The word kumite is Japanese and generally translates to sparring. But in the topsy-turvy world of Frank Dukes, kumite means roughly 1,170 people beating each other senseless over the course of 3 days in a top-secret, illegal, no-holds-barred fight to the death. The Black Belt article contains more wild inaccuracies than the average Steven Seagal shootout. At one point, they state that Dukes has no knowledge of previous competitions, before proceeding to detail all of Frank's knowledge of previous competitions. He discusses at least 3 previous kumites, and if we run the math on this, if Frank had knowledge of 3 previous kumites by 1980, and he won his first kumite at age 19, that means he has been competing in no-holds-barred death matches since the age of 9. Over the 6-page span of this interview, the reader is treated to more fantasy fight discussion than a schoolyard conversation about whose dad is the toughest. One year the kumite was a mud wrestling match, one year it was held on a cone-shaped surface, and I still have trouble sleeping as my brain attempts to conjure an image of how in the name of the patron saint of professional fisting that is even possible. One of the many questions surrounding the kumite that has never been answered is, how many participants were there? According to Frank, every fighter fights 20 matches per day. and 3 matches are happening at all times. Every time a fighter loses, he exits the competition, so using what we know, how many competitors are there? After literal minutes of trying to work this out, I gave up and sought the help of the most advanced artificial intelligence the world has ever seen. ChatGPT is a deity born of code and bare metal, an oracle of silicone and semiconductors that stands as testament to man's recklessness in pursuit of unfettered technological advancement. An atom bomb with a user interface, a downloadable death knell for human thought. Yet even this, the most advanced AI known to man, was unable to make sense of the fucking Kumite. No matter how I plugged in the variables of Frank's Fantasy Fight Club, it gave me a different answer every time, ranging anywhere from 4 competitors to over 400. And look, I'm not trying to body shame anyone here, but one of the most unrealistic parts of this article is the fact that this man ever claimed he was a heavyweight. The fucking trophy looks like it weighs more than he does. Black Belt editor Jon Stewart would later apologise for publishing martial arts fanfiction in his martial arts fanfiction magazine. Stewart said, "Sometimes we get caught, sometimes we were naive enough to think this added up." While the overall article is about as grounded in reality as Harry Potter's dream journal, Frank does make one Nostradamus-level prediction that is shockingly accurate. When asked about what type of fighters would be victorious in a style versus style competition such as the Kumite, Dukes put forward the idea that the key to winning was not being the best sumo wrestler or karateka, but being cross-trained in a number of styles. In an oddly prescient way, Frank predicted the rise of the mixed martial artist. Eight years after its publication, thanks in part to Black Belt editor Jon Stewart writing a note explaining Frank as the #1 ninja expert in the world, Hollywood opened its doors to Frank Dukes. In 1976, the Sex Pistols played a gig at the Manchester Lesser Free Trade Hall. It was a small gig and only a handful of people turned up. When they returned 3 weeks later, they played to an audience of hundreds and properly ushered in the era of British punk. In any other timeline, that first gig would have been forgotten, and their triumphant return a few weeks later would be the show everyone remembers. But for those few dozen people in attendance, that first night at the Lesser Free Trade Hall was the splitting of the punk atom and the show that would go down in history as possibly the most influential gig of all time. In attendance that night were future members of Joy Division and then New Order, The Smiths, The Fall, and 2 men who would go on to found the hugely influential Factory Records. All of these artists would later claim that this show was what convinced them to start a band. The ripple effect of that gig can still be felt today. Frank's Sex Pistols moment was the 1988 martial arts classic, Bloodsport.
A flying jump kick 7 feet in the air. A secret arena. And a deadly competition. An American ninja in Hong Kong. In pursuit of a dream and pursued by his own government. It's the stuff martial arts films are made of. Comic book heroes with supernatural abilities. But the most unbelievable part of Bloodsport is that it really happened.
And at the risk of turning this video into a movie review, I'm about to review this movie because Bloodsport is so good it makes decades of Frank's bullshit all seem worthwhile. It's difficult to know where to start when discussing a movie where every second of its runtime is somehow crammed with excellence. Do we start with young Frank and his Belgian by way of California with a hint of speech impediment accent?
You're not gonna call the cops?
Not if we make a deal.
What kind of a deal?
How about Ray Jackson absolutely owning every scene he's in?
Jackson, you really going to Hong Kong?
I love anything with full contact. Need a few more scars on my face.
I heard you can get killed at that Kumite.
Only if you fuck up.
Okay, USA. Okay, USA.
Maybe the scene where Frank and Ray play 80s arcade game Karate Champ. Or maybe this guy. I don't know who he is, but he's clearly the Boba Fett of Bloodsport. He doesn't do much, but just look at how fucking cool this guy is. And what about this lovable rogue?
What's the whole up?
Bloodsport is a thorough retelling of Kumite, a learning experience, and was written by Sheldon Lettich, who previously worked with Frank on the short movie Firefight. Sheldon said of Bloodsport, "I had known Frank for a number of months before I came up with the idea for Bloodsport. Frank told me a lot of tall tales, most of which turned out to be bullshit, but his stories about participating in this so-called Kumite event sounded like a great idea for a movie. Bloodsport is corny, it's badly acted by almost everyone involved, and its fight scenes do not hold up well in an era of John Wick doing Sambo on the back of a horse or whatever. But nonetheless, Bloodsport remains one of the best martial arts movies of all time. And in all seriousness, I just need to point out how much I absolutely love how grimy and oppressive the aesthetic of this movie is. Filmed on location in Hong Kong, it's one of the few movies to ever record scenes inside Kowloon Walled City before it was demolished in 1993. Every scene filmed there is strikingly brutal, and its visual influence can be seen in everything from Ghost in the Shell to Call of Duty Black Ops. Much like how a musical is judged by its songs, a martial arts movie lives or dies by its action scenes. Bloodsport is more or less non-stop action. From the moment young Frank pokes his head into Tanaka's window, it's wall-to-wall training montages, kinda pseudo-sexual torture, dim max and death touches. The foil to Frank's all-American good guy, despite being a Canadian portrayed by a Belgian, is Chong Li. Frank insists Li was based on a real person who killed 6 people in one kumite. And can we just take a second to appreciate that Bolo Young, who played Chong Li, was 43 at the time? Look at this absolute unit. For contrast, here he is in Enter the Dragon 15 years earlier, looking virtually identical. For a film that garnered such a vast and dedicated following, Bloodsport was shockingly not particularly well received. Even today its Metacritic score is a dismal 29, but its user score is 7.9, proving what anyone with common sense knew all along, that applying a points out of 10 scale to judge the merit of a piece of art whose appreciation is subjective to each individual is absolutely fucking pointless. Regardless of review scores, Bloodsport earned $50 million at the box office in its first year and spawned 3 sequels that I'd be willing to bet no one has ever seen.
But they should!
Because if I have to watch Bloodsport 4 The Dark Kumite, then I'm taking you down with me.
A champion. He triumphs in the Kumite, the ultimate contest of warriors. A cop.
I thought you were dead. You're so wrong.
Take the shot. You got him.
He loses his chance to save another cop's life. Now, obsessed with revenge, he is driven over the line.
The hell have you done?
To a prison where insanity reigns.
No rules!
Take the shot, John!
Bloodsport 4, The Dark Kumite.
Okay, I realize this is the least of that trailer's problems.
Take the shot. You got him.
But that subtitle, The Dark Kumite? Really? The first Kumite had enough bodies at the end to fill a mass grave. How the fuck is it getting any darker than that?
I seem to misplace my pen.
Oh, I guess that's how. Sequels aside, Bloodsport's effect on pop culture was seismic. If you're an MMA fan, then you can probably give Bloodsport some small thanks for that. The idea of a no-holds-barred tournament, pitting fighters of various styles against each other, was undeniably influential on Art Davey and Horian Gracie when they came up with the first draft of the UFC. I mean, the original design of the octagon was going to be a flat surface surrounded by an alligator-filled moat, and if that doesn't sound like something straight out of the Kumite, then I don't know what does. Pop culture icons like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, games that took the idea of international secret fighting tournaments, also owe a debt of gratitude to Jean-Claude Van Damme, Sheldon Lettich, and through gritted fucking teeth, Frank Dukes. And while you can argue that Dukes basically just stole the idea of the Kumite from Count Dante's tales of secret death matches in Southeast Asia, and that his notions of combining all styles to be successful was also lifted wholesale from Dante's philosophy, it doesn't change the fact that, following the release of Bloodsport, its influence could immediately be felt in everything from Street Fighter II in 1991 to the UFC in 1993. Some of the greatest fighters of all time also cite Bloodsport as their gateway to martial arts. GSP, Anderson Silva and Bas Rutten to name but three. One of the hardest pills to swallow in all of MMA is that an alternate timeline exists where Frank Dukes decides no one will ever buy this bullshit story about the Kumite, cancels his interview with Black Belt, and GSP grows up to become a paleontologist instead of a mixed martial artist. Movie Frank would go on to win the Kumite, avenge Senzo's honor, bone the ubiquitous love interest, and return to whatever top-secret espionage duties the army normally assigns to a sweaty-palmed 19-year-old. But not before we're treated to this screen. And for most people, this freeze frame provided near-fatal tonal whiplash. In a twist worthy of Shyamalan, Bloodsport goes from hokey martial arts movie to biopic in a split second, a move that is roughly as shocking as the end of the Terminator 2 director's cut.
What the fuck?
Years later, Sheldon Lettich discussed the reality of the Kumite and said, "There was one guy Frank introduced me to named Richard Bender, who claimed to have actually been at the Kumite event and who swore everything Frank told me was true. A few years later, this guy had a falling out with Frank and confessed to me that everything he told me about the Kumite was a lie. Frank had coached him in what to say." Till this day, Frank still claims that the Kumite is as undeniably real as gravity.
Gravity ain't real!
Oh, for fuck's sake.
But anyone with basic intelligence can see that the story has more holes in it than Batman's parents. Why has no other Kumite winner ever spoken about the competition? In its hundreds of years of existence, surely someone other than Frank would have been allowed to talk about it. If Frank is 329-0, how come none of his 329 opponents have ever been found? If he competed in the 1980 Kumite as he claimed, then how come his record never changed from 329-0? Frank claimed he set a record for fastest kick at 72 miles per hour, but how was it even possible for video cameras in the 1970s to measure the speed of kicks so accurately when they absolutely didn't have that kind of technology back then? And even if it was all recorded by high-speed cameras, why has none of that footage ever surfaced? Oh wait, I apologize. Footage of the Kumite does exist. Frank silenced all his doubters when he released the shockingly real, unquestionable footage proving once and for all that the Kumite was real. But unfortunately it was recorded on a Nokia 3310 that was covered in strawberry jam. The resulting video is so low resolution and monochromatic that Frank could claim to be fighting a mirror match against himself, and you'd have a hard time disproving it. Also, this looks suspiciously like footage from any one of the countless number of full-contact karate tournaments that took place in the 70s and 80s, not a secret illegal death match. The holy trinity of martial arts bullshitters are arguably Dukes, Ishida Kim, and Count Dante. There's a thread of deceit woven into the fabric of each man, an invisible yet indelible strand that links all three men at their very core. That strand is that they all claim membership of the Black Dragon Fighting Society. The BDFS is either a secret society that has existed in the shadows for millennia, or a marketing gimmick started by Dante to sell copies of his deadliest fighting arts book. While he is considered by many to be a fake martial artist, Dante strove for full contact fights in an era of martial arts where that was seen as sacrilege. He was a real criminal with a propensity for solving problems by blowing them the fuck up, but we'll dig into all of that a little bit later. Ishida Kim, as we all know, is the world's horniest ninja and the original weeaboo. Kim claimed to have trained with Dante and been a student of the Black Dragons, and can be seen here doing the Kata Dante, which is either a deadly assassination method named after the Count himself, or a grown man having an upright seizure in the middle of an interpretive dance routine. Frank Dukes not only claims Black Dragon lineage, but the organisers of the Kumite were none other than the Black Dragon Fighting Society. Frank's spot in the Kumite was actually an alternate for Dante himself, after Dante was unable to compete due to being dead, possibly by death touch. A lot of people really want to believe in the Kumite, and I get it. Some of us grew up with battered VHS copies of Bloodsport, watched and rewatched until they invariably fell apart. It's a big part of a lot of people's lives, and the Kumite is fucking cool. It's real-life Street Fighter too, and it makes style versus style fighting look badass, instead of what it actually looks like, which is some ponytailed taekwondo dork getting savagely humped by a wrestler.
It loses.
But it's been 30 years, and there is still zero evidence the Kumite ever happened, at least the way Dukes described it. In order to believe in the Kumite, you have to have a childlike belief in an improbable narrative spun by a man whose life is defined by improbable narratives, while simultaneously ignoring the mountain of evidence to the contrary. In order for the Kumite to be real, Frank would have to be a man with a capital M. He would have to have unparalleled physical and mental strength, character, and determination. The kind of man who could complete such a mission because a normal person would be incapable. The agent would almost have to be a Superman to commit all of this. But Frank isn't Superman, and the Kumite isn't real. Frank's later years were not kind to him. His martial arts career arguably peaked in 1993 when he did a live performance in Bercy Stadium, France. There, thousands of French people flushed money right down the toilet after they paid to watch him smash bottles that seemed suspiciously like sugar glass and punch his way through bulletproof glass. The downward spiral began later that year when Dukes was assaulted by former UFC heavyweight Zane Frazier at a martial arts convention. Despite Frank spending years training blindfolded in order to detect attacks from any angle, somehow a man who is 6'6" and 230 pounds snuck up behind him and sucker punched him. And while the idea of Frank's ninja training being completely useless in the exact scenario it was designed for is pretty hilarious, it was nevertheless a serious assault that Dukes claimed did lasting damage to him.
And it shows in my medical conditions. I have 4 square indentations in my skull from being hit with brass knuckles.
In Frank's version of the story, Frazier jumped him with a gang of UFC fighters who ultimately all got their asses kicked by Dukes. Because of course they did.
The CCTV cameras captured it. The CCTV cameras captured me fighting off 4 top fighters of the UFC. I won't mention their names.
Regardless of how it went down, the resulting injury forced Dukes to undergo a brain scan, the results of which were no laughing matter. Frank discovered he had been living with multiple brain tumours. Dukes even claimed that he wrote The Secret Man because he wasn't expecting to survive and wanted to get his 100% true life story out there before he died. Frank did survive, but not without significant cost. He was blinded in his left eye and suffered facial paralysis and memory loss. To further compound the fall of Frank, in 1994, his house was destroyed by an earthquake, and to add insult to injury, his wife left him. And in one of the most tragic bromance breakups since the dissolution of McLobov, Frank sued former friend and Bloodsport star Jean-Claude Van Damme for breach of contract over writing credits for the Van Damme movie The Quest. Dukes and Van Damme had been friends since Bloodsport in '88. Frank was even dating Van Damme's sister-in-law, but Dukes lost the court case and then lost an appeal, and the hottest martial arts power couple, Van Dukes, ceased to exist. But in his most unforgivable act, Dukes was allegedly offered $25,000 to assassinate Steven Seagal, and he didn't take the job.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
I'd be willing to concede that had Dukes performed a successful hit on legendary blues musician and dancehall icon Seagal, he'd be a celebrated figure in the martial arts community, and we'd all be a lot more accommodating of his tales of the Kumite. The rise of the internet was the death knell for Duke's career. While in the 1980s it was as easy as this to convince someone you were a CIA ninja.
Have you ever heard about a championship called the Kumite?
It's like the Super Bowl of martial arts. The winner is the Ultimate Warrior.
I am that champion.
Oh, cool!
The internet generation were far more cynical. The free exchange of information over the internet meant that suddenly it was a lot harder to convince people about your track record in no-holds-barred death matches. Ultimately, Duke's greatest opponent would be the invention of search engines. All of which brings us to today. Dukes is still telling anyone who'll listen that the Kumite is real, that Senzo was real, that he really did become King of the Ninjas at 16, and that he really did get recruited into the CIA in a public restroom at age 19, among many other tall tales. And in a weird way, I admire that. He is nothing if not dedicated to maintaining his fantasy kingdom, and it might be surprising to hear after literally everything I've said over the last hour, but I think I like Frank Dukes. Frank represents a period in martial arts that can never and will never exist again. A time when you could tell someone that you were a ninja and all you had to do was make a claw shape with your fingers and they'd probably believe you. A time when you didn't immediately dismiss the dim mak as being complete nonsense. It was stupid and it was goofy, but it had character. Here we are 40 years later still talking about Kim and Dukes because they were characters. If anyone's still talking about the latest Dagestani wrestler to hump his way across the UFC in 40 years' time, I'll be genuinely shocked. Maybe because I grew up with a dad who scared the living shit out of me with his tales of the witch who lived in the nearby woods, or that every scratch on his weather-beaten hands had been caused by a tiger he'd wrestled at work that day, but I have a pretty high tolerance for bullshit artists like Dukes. But after months of writing and researching Frank, I still feel no closer to any kind of understanding of who he really is. Every facet of his existence is so completely wrapped up in stories lifted entirely from Bond movies, and he is so ruthlessly committed to upholding this facade that at times even I found myself wondering if his entire life is one colossal house of lies, or if he really is the most interesting man alive. If Dukes came clean and admitted that everything was a lie, I genuinely think he'd be viewed a lot more favourably, sort of like a Jordan Belfort-style conman, the kind of lovable rogue that can go from villain to hero in the public eye with one good biopic. But Duke's realm of fantasy is holding fast. He does not waver in its defence. He is, and will remain forever, the secret man.
Only you see
Frank's world of fantasy fighting does not exist in a vacuum. As much as he would love for you to believe him, his tales of death matches and dim max weren't of his creation. I genuinely don't think he's creative enough to invent something like that by himself. No, Frank achieved his lofty status atop the mountain of misbelief by standing on the shoulders of fake giants. Because before Dukes, there was Dante.
In tonight's Blown Apart Breakdown, it's been described as Sweet Valley High meets the last days of Sodom and Gomorrah, but if you've seen the Netflix documentary series Cobra Kai, you'll have borne witness to the devastation that an unchecked karate-based problem can wreak upon a community. For over 6 years, what's become known as the All-Valley Dojo Wars have kung fu kicked their way out of the dojos and wrought terror on the streets of this once quiet community.
Okay, so Cobra Kai is obviously not a documentary. If the sheer amount of karate-related crimes in All Valley was a real-life statistic, then rappers everywhere would be scrambling to find shit that rhymes with Cobra Kai because they just overtook the Crips as the most prolific gang in the United States. The reason Cobra Kai could only ever exist as a work of fiction is because karate absolutely fucking sucks. Karate isn't a martial art, it's a distraction mechanic for 5-year-olds so parents can get an hour's peace one day a week. If karate was a font, it would be Wingdings. If it was one of the Lost Boys, it would be Marco. Karate is the martial art you do when all other martial arts were busy that day. Karate is like Aikido if it had a humiliation fetish. There's no way karate could ever be responsible for dojo wars, murder, and $1 million heists, right? Right?
The deadliest man who ever lived. His murderous poison and weapons. Count 1, Raphael, Dante.
Karate wasn't always a laughingstock, because at one point, no one in the West even knew what it was. So they hadn't yet had the opportunity to make fun of it. All of that changed thanks to a man named Robert Trias, who would come to be known as the godfather of American karate. Trias was a machinist's mate in the US Navy, and was stationed in the Solomon Islands during World War II. In what sounds like a discarded origin story for Johnny Cage, Trias, who was a trained boxer, noticed a mysterious Asian man would watch him from the shadows whenever he was training. The mysterious, possibly magical Asian man would mimic Trias's footwork and punches, before allegedly turning into a crane and flying away. The mysterious Asian man turned out to be a missionary named Tungi Singh, and eventually Trias agreed to a sparring match with him. Trias said, "I asked him if he wanted to spar with gloves, and he said it really didn't matter. Well, before you know it, he was giving me the biggest thrashing of my life, and I was really embarrassed." Oh, this man lost a fight? No way. He kept on pointing out how easily he could kill me if he wanted to, which honestly sounds like a complete dick move to pull in sparring, but I guess it was a different era. After receiving a hiding from Singh, Trias begged the man to teach him the ways of karate. After an entire year of training with Singh, Trias earned his first degree black belt, and I can practically hear the screaming laughter of jiu-jitsu fighters all over the world with that one, but let's just keep that to ourselves, shall we? Anyway,
what do you mean anyway?
Upon returning to the US, Trias began teaching karate out of his backyard, and eventually became the first Caucasian American to open a karate school in the United States, when he opened his dojo in Phoenix, Arizona in 1945. One of Trias' students was a man named John Gregory. One day in 1961, Gregory got a phone call from a childhood friend of his back home in Chicago. His friend was asking how his move to Phoenix was working out, and if there were any karate dojos out there. Gregory told his friend all about Robert Trias and his dojo, and almost as soon as the conversation ended, his friend was making plans to move from Chicago to Phoenix, with one desire: to train karate. His friend's name was John Timothy Keehan, the man who would one day come to be known as Count Dante. Before we continue, it's important to remember one thing. Dante was a prolific liar. The very fact that this video contains the man's own words means that by default, this video is riddled with lies. All who met him spoke of his natural charisma and the aura of a man who, when he spoke, made you believe that anything, even stories of death matches and dim max, was possible. Dante was the blueprint for every martial arts fraud since then. His was a template that would be copied over and over by people like Frank Dukes and Ishida Kim. Copies of copies of copies. The human equivalent of recursive degeneration. Some of Dante's lies may be obvious, some more subtle, but as we proceed, keep in mind, the devil doesn't make for a reliable narrator. John Timothy Keehan was born on the 4th of February 1939 on the south side of Chicago. His family was of Irish-American descent and relatively well-to-do, with his father Jack Keehan working as an OB-GYN and later as president of Ashland State Bank. In time, Keehan would reject this version of his origin story, and later claimed that his parents, Jack and Dorothy, were in fact Spanish nobility who had fled the Civil War and moved first to Canada and then Chicago. This is one of Keehan's more easily debunked stories, however, because just look at this man's head. This is a 100% pure Mullingar head on this man. Here we see Dante inquiring if you need your driveway tarmacked. A head like this has its origins not in the Andalusian foothills, but firmly rooted in the rain-soaked mire of an Irish peat bog. As with almost everything in his life, there are differing accounts surrounding the origin story of Keehan's introduction to martial arts, or as he called them, the fistic arts. One story recounts the young Keehan being sent to martial arts training after being beaten up by a home invader, but the more reliable story comes from Keehan's childhood friend, John Gregory. One day in 1947, Gregory, who would have been 10 or 11 at the time, came across Keehan as he was being beaten up by two older boys. Gregory joined in to even the odds. I joined him and we turned the tables. We beat the shit out of those guys, and John and I became friends. The two Johns would become lifelong friends. They did everything together, from dating to joyriding, including one time Keehan nearly killed them both after stealing and subsequently crashing his father's car, but the beating he took the day they met was something that stuck with Keehan his entire adolescence. It was always important for John to be strong. I don't think he ever forgot that beating when I met him. He never wanted it to happen again. Keehan began training the fistic arts aged 13. Most martial arts frauds have dubious backgrounds in various esoteric-sounding martial arts, and Keehan was somewhat of a trendsetter in that regard. While tribalism in martial arts in those days meant that people tended to pick one martial art and make it their entire life, the list of martial arts Keehan claimed to have trained was longer than the controversies section on John Jones' Wikipedia. Keehan claimed to have trained in, but was not limited to, karate, aikido, judo, jujitsu, jute, hapkido, tangsudo, mudok kwan, taekwondo, Thai boxing, Chinese boxing, Western boxing, unboxing videos, kibo, bo-kibo, bo-kibo? Is he just making this shit up? Despite Keehan's claims to have trained in basically every martial art, both real and conceptual, it is reliably confirmed that he did indeed train boxing at Johnny Coolan's gym on East 63rd Street in Chicago. Unlike the secluded ninja village atop the magical mountain of misbelief where Frank Dukes trained, Johnny Coolan's gym was and still is a real place. The gym is still standing today, but under the name of Clarence Griffin's Windy City Boxing Club. Keehan also joined his high school wrestling team at Mount Carmel High, all of which at least puts him levels above other fake martial arts masters by proving that Keehan did actually train in some legitimate fighting styles, not just the ancient mystical art of dim-macking the punani or waving his hands around like he's conducting an invisible orchestra.
You know, in those days in Chicago, it was pretty hard to stay out of trouble. Everyone was always getting into fights, you know. I was always very interested in bodybuilding, weightlifting, boxing, wrestling, judo, and things like this.
However, even the legitimate claims are subject to typical Dante exaggeration, as it wasn't good enough that he simply trained boxing and wrestling. He had to claim to be the heavyweight boxing and wrestling champion of high school. Claims that are completely unverified and also somewhat ludicrous, as I'm not aware of any high school boxing championship outside of anime high schools. For 2.5 years after high school, from 1956 to 58, Keehan attended Northern Illinois University and then the University of Miami. He was described as an average student, but academia was never going to be the pursuit of a man with a mind full of fistic mayhem like Keehan. In April of 1957, he was arrested for trying to sell a firearm, and by 1958, he had dropped out of college completely and embarked upon the next stage of his path to becoming the world's deadliest man, by learning the ancient mystical art of industrialized slaughter for fun and profit with the US military. Keehan would practically dim-mack himself in an orgiastic frenzy while telling Black Belt magazine about his murderous militaristic exploits, up to and including being responsible for literal war crimes.
If you've ever been in the military, they don't play games and we don't take prisoners very often. We're no different than the Japanese and the Germans. Like, I've blown away a lot of people that were supposed to be prisoners, just wasted them. That's part of war.
Keehan was apparently the MVP of Army and scored at least 25 kills on a rampage that spanned from Vietnam to Korea, and that's not including the other 25 kills he racked up in illegal death matches, but we'll get to those later. A common thread with martial arts frauds is that they tend to have more stolen valor than a public torrent for Band of Brothers, the most famous example of this being Frank Dukes, the man who has fought in so many wars you can probably find him everywhere from the Siege of Kaysan to the ice planet of Hoth. National security gave him a pass to brag about his achievements in books and on TV, but he can't show you any actual proof of this because that would be a threat to national security.
If you're a spy, what are you doing on TV telling everyone you're a spy? The idea of being a spy is that your life is secret and nobody knows about it. So what is this?
Frank's actual verifiable military service is essentially that of a reservist who never saw any combat or overseas deployment and whose biggest achievement was losing a fight with a stationary truck. In this respect, Dukes copied Keehan's homework almost word for word, as he too saw less combat than a Zen meditation retreat, and despite what he told Black Belt, Kian had the worst military record since in the Navy. So when it comes to his tales of killing more Asians than the Cultural Revolution, his exploits should be taken about as seriously as those of his greatest imitator, Frank Dukes. For researching this video, I risked putting myself on a watch list by contacting the FBI and asking for a copy of their Dante files, which also helpfully included a lot of information about his military service. Despite his tales of being a one-man genocide, his FBI file kinda dim-maxed the myth of Dante the War Master. Kian was in the Marine Corps Reserves, that much is true. He obtained a rank of Private First Class, and his role was listed as a mortarman and light weapons infantryman. But there is no record of him being deployed overseas, and he received an honourable discharge in 1959 after 1 year of service. In 1960, he was inducted into the US Army, and within 10 months, he had been court-martialed and dishonourably discharged. The reason for his court-martial? Well, Kian had gone AWOL for a month and a half in order to satiate his lust for that most addictive and insidious of narcotics, marijuana.
Tell the readers of Black Belt that I share with the late Bruce Lee a certain taste for cannabis.
Smoke weed every day.
I'm not making this up. His FBI file states in black and white that he dipped on the army to go buy some weed for a month and a half. When Pablo Armbar was caught, he was in possession of 2 whole marijuana cigarettes with a street value of a whopping 0.5 grams.
Smoke weed.
His service records were also pretty damning in their appraisal of Private First Class John Timothy Keehan, and also give us a pretty raw insight into his mental state at the time, thanks to an excerpt from a psychiatric report.
He has always had migraine headaches and been nervous. The prisoner is an unreliable informant, and many discrepancies and inconsistencies were noted in the history. Information received from the previous psychiatric reports indicates that he is subject to violent and antisocial behavior, has had many auto accidents, destroyed property, shot up a friend's car with a pistol. Also was described a dramatic suicidal attempt, taking an overdose of narcotics, hitting himself in the head with a pistol, and trying to run in front of a car.
The FBI came to a similar conclusion, one of their reports ending with a stark warning, its faded ink still screaming off the page in all caps and underlined.
Keehan should be considered dangerous because he is reportedly subject to a violent and antisocial behavior pattern and has suicidal tendencies.
Despite his abysmal military career, it was, however, a pivotal moment for Keehan. While in the service, he learned some hand-to-hand combat, which reignited his passion for martial arts and fighting. So after being dishonorably discharged, he made that fateful call to his old friend and current student of Robert Trias, John Gregory. The vast majority of the interviews we have with Dante, we have thanks to a writer named Masad Ayoub and the publication he worked for, Black Belt magazine. The interviews Dante gave to Black Belt are some of the best resources for information about the Count that we have, and as such, I don't think any discussion of the Count is really complete without a brief sojourn into the fantastical, fanciful, whimsical world of Black Belt magazine. Black Belt is the world's longest-running martial arts magazine. The first issue, Karate, chopped its way onto shelves in 1961, and for almost 3 decades until the advent of UFC 1, it was a lost city of refuge for mail-order assassins who routinely nunchucked their own testicles. It's 50% National Geographic, 50% National Enquirer, and its target demographic appears to be middle-aged mall ninjas who are struggling to accept that magic isn't real. Black Belt is also possibly the greatest repository of knowledge on that most deadly of all martial techniques, what some call the poison finger, vibrating palm strike, or to give it its street name, the dim mak. As recently as the early 2000s, Black Belt was still running advertisements for Dim Mak instructional tapes. In fact, in an issue that has none other than Tito Ortiz on the cover, you could still find people trying to sell you the deadly secrets of the Dim Mak in the back pages. Although somewhat surprisingly, even with 5 decades worth of articles on the science behind the Dim Mak, the best answer Black Belt can come up with for whether it is or isn't real is maybe? And when it comes to ninjas, Black Belt was like the Typhoid Mary of the 1980s ninja craze. A super spreader for the word of ninja infiltration techniques, ninja climbing techniques, ninja invisibility, ninja children. Basically, if you can think of a thing, Black Belt added the word ninja to it and wrote a 5-page article about it. Black Belt essentially existed off the fumes of Bruce Lee and the ninja craze right up until the mid-90s, when they were grudgingly forced to accept that, without so much as a spin kick or vibrating palm strike, jiu-jitsu had beaten almost every other martial art in legitimate, verified competition. The absolute refusal to accept the reality of the situation was emblematic of a publication that had spent 3 decades wondering why the police aren't armed with nunchucks and throwing stars. But it's somewhat surprising, given that they had been reporting on judo and even sambo tournaments since the 60s, yet they were left in a state of catatonic shock at the efficacy of grappling in real fights. You can practically taste the resentment as the 90s rolled on, and Black Belt published article after article positing the question of what would be the martial art to defeat what they called the Gracie tackle. Like an old soldier hiding in the hills of Iwo Jima, unaware that the war had ended decades ago, Black Belt clung to fantasy-based martial arts for as long as possible. Even old George Dillman gave his opinion on how best to defeat this smothering menace, and unsurprisingly, his answer was to pressure point KO someone as soon as they tried a takedown. But by the early 2000s, Black Belt finally embraced MMA as a martial art of its own, and were routinely featuring MMA stars like Tito Ortiz or Victor Belfort on the cover, and doing scandalously sexy photo shoots with Joe Rogan.
I'm captured by your love and your pretty smile, your devastating beauty and your sweet profile. I love you.
But the absolute best part of Black Belt are the advertisements. Do you urgently need to kill someone at your office with a roundhouse kick, but you're worried your slacks might not accommodate that level of violence? Then you need the Chuck Norris action pants. For when you want to kick someone in the face and comply with a business casual dress code. How about Chemo Leopoldo's Fierce Fighting on VHS, which threatens to teach you attacks so painful there is virtually no attacker you cannot defeat? Maybe you want to look like you're wearing a DLC outfit for Tekken when you train, or whatever the fuck this Halloween turnip-looking monstrosity is. How about some cool patches to show your love for karate, or judo, or fucking Nazism? Black Belt is a window into a world of martial arts that is so far removed from the one we live in currently that it's like peering into an alternate reality. It's a glimpse into an era where people really, seriously wondered if Bruce Lee had been killed by a dim mak, and genuinely believed ninjas were the end boss of fighting. It's no wonder a man like Dante was able to captivate both writers and readers with his tales of death matches and dim maks. But I would urge anyone to have a dig through Black Belt's back catalogue. Their entire library from 1961 to 2004 has been uploaded to Google Books for free and is absolutely worth reading today. Not just for the incredibly quaint, almost naive charm of the whole thing, but if only to see just how martial arts discussion seemed to have stagnated for literal decades around the endless cyclic bitching of whether karate is better than judo or hapkido or fucking Tang Soo Do, until suddenly the UFC threw a live hand grenade into the discussion, and the magazine and its readers were forced to reckon with an entirely new era of reality-based combat. After reconnecting with John Gregory, Keehan headed straight for Phoenix to begin training at Trius's dojo. His obsession with karate had gone full-blown, and he would spend months at a time living and training in Phoenix before returning to Chicago to teach classes. 2 years after joining Trius, he had earned his black belt and had opened his own dojo in Chicago, the impossibly cool-sounding Imperial Academy of Fighting Arts.
International Karate Championships are being held in Chicago this Sunday, and the people here in the Imperial Academy of Fighting Arts are getting ready for it. Well, Mr. Keehan, what's karate all about, anyway?
Well, karate is an oriental means of self-defense, which is now used as a sport.
Is it very popular in the United States?
Well, it's very popular, especially here in Chicago, which is about the strongest concentration of karate in this country.
This was probably the peak of Keehan's love for karate. Within a few years of opening the Imperial Academy of Fighting Arts, he would ultimately dismiss karate as being weak and ineffective. What? No way. Even going so far as penning a 4-page essay about everything wrong with karate, but in the early 60s, Keehan was still simping for karate like me on Valentina's Instagram. Oh, hold on a second, I just got a text message here, hang on.
She has what?
What's up, guys? It's your boy, Napoleon Bonaparte here, and I'm going to tell you all about Count Dante. Here are the top 10 facts about Count Dante. Number 1. Count Dante was not actually his real name. Number 2. Jeff Fuffmonson. Bob Sapp, Valentina is love. Something something Steaky Steven Siegel. Insert analogy and or metaphor. Here. Someone please wake me from this nightmare. I can no longer recall the sound of my mother's voice. Am I a man who dreamed he was a machine, or a machine that dreamed it was a man? Fucking AI. Anyway,
What do you mean, anyway?
Keehan wasn't satisfied with just owning a local dojo. His eyes were set on a much larger prize.
Complete global saturation.
John Keehan was many things, not all of them good, but stupid certainly wasn't one of them. Even as children, John Gregory had been in awe of Keehan's way of looking at the world. Gregory said, he was just so damn smart. He could do anything. He was always calculating angles and seeing if there was any way he could come out even higher on top. With him, there was always an easier and a better way than what other people were doing. Keehan applied this way of thinking to his newfound passion for karate and identified a clear gap in the market. Karate existed in tiny, isolated pockets across America. Each dojo was unconnected, unfocused, and making less return on investment than Hawk to a coin. The interest was there, but the organization wasn't. America was ripe for seeding with karate, and Keehan would be the one to spread that seed. He began working on grand ideas of spreading karate nationally, not just a handful of dojos scattered across the continent, but thousands under one organization with the ultimate goal of making karate as popular and lucrative as boxing. Trius also saw potential in the young Keehan, and together the two would found the first governing body for karate in the US, the United States Karate Association, or USKA. Trius would use the USKA to spread the word about karate on the West Coast, with Keehan taking over operations in the Midwest. But simply founding a governing body for karate wasn't enough. Keehan wanted something big, a true spectacle, a Roman Colosseum of karate hijinks to show off what this new craze was all about, and make money in the process. The 1963 World Karate Tournament was born. This was the first tournament of its kind. Karate had never been seen on such a large stage before. Jesus, I wonder why. The tournament was held on July 28, 1963, at the Chicago University Fieldhouse, and attracted the luminaries of the 1960s martial arts scene. In attendance were Jun Rhee, the man who would later attempt to teach Muhammad Ali his patented acupunch in preparation for his fight with Antonio Inoki, and was also responsible for the worst jingle since the sound of an approaching Krampus.
When you take jewelry self-defense, then you too can say, nobody bothers me, nobody bothers me, nobody bothers me, nobody bothers me. Call USA 1000.
Ed Parker, one of the biggest names in karate and star of the single greatest movie fight scene of all time, was also in attendance.
What the hell do you want? You, Mr. Lee. We'll see about that.
And at the head table, none other than the biggest martial arts star possibly of all time, Bruce Lee. The '63 tournament was a huge success, with around 300 karate practitioners from all across America competing in fights where every punch and kick was pulled harder than a parachute ripcord. But despite this distinct lack of contact, the 1963 tournament felt like a sea change for karate in the US. A fellow Chicago and karate instructor, Jimmy Jones, said of the tournament, "This was really the start of karate in the United States." In anticipation for the second World Karate Tournament, Black Belt ran an article about Trias and Keehan, their founding of the USKA, and how the two men were more or less responsible for the rapid growth of karate in the US. Keehan was described as one of the country's top instructors, and photographed here exploding a brick with what is possibly some kind of brick-based dim mak technique. 1963 cemented itself as a vintage year for Keehan when he fought in one of his only ever recorded competitive matches. He faced off against Gary Alexander at the North American Championships at Madison Square Garden, and in a prelude for what would become Count Dante's signature style, he was disqualified for punching Alexander in the dick. There's a weather-beaten old phrase that goes, "Money and fame don't change people, it just reveals who they were all along." After the '63 tournament, Keehan's dojos were filling up, and he found himself with a lot more money and considerably more fame. At least, fame amongst the readers of Black Belt magazine, which is probably the fame equivalent of winning Best in Show at a brony convention. But regardless, as his wealth and fame grew, the first tendrils of his alter ego, Count Dante, began to encroach at the margins of his sanity. The first person to notice a change in Keehan was, unsurprisingly, his oldest friend, John Gregory. Gregory was living and sleeping at the Imperial Academy of Fighting Arts dojo, and visited Keehan's apartment one day. There, he was shocked to find it was filled with tens of thousands of dollars worth of brand new clothes. Some of these clothes even became part of Dante lore. Keehan worked as a bouncer in bars on the south side of Chicago, and while working the doors, would wear the most flamboyant outfits he could find. Leotards, a purple cape, a beret, all in the hopes that his prince-esque getup would provoke patrons into a fight. I think it would be wrong to try and paint Keehan as a dedicated martial artist who just lost his way under the malign influence of riches and fame. By all accounts, from an early age he was charming, charismatic, and always looking for an angle, a new way to make money, a way to game the system, but with a violent streak, as evidenced by an arrest for assault and battery in 1960, and the reports of him shooting up a friend's car, all of this long before the spectre of Count Juan Rafael Dante began to chip away at his psyche. And with his newfound celebrity, Keehan once again began to work those angles. He opened businesses all over Chicago. By the late 60s he was running 2 dojos, a gift shop, a jewelry store, a painting and decorating business with John Gregory, working as a bouncer, and would routinely rent out his dojo to a fencing group and modeling school. But most famously and bizarrely of all, Keehan entered the hairdressing business. Proving the duality of man, his employment status is listed variously within the FBI files as construction worker, martial artist, and hairdresser. He worked at a salon called the Powder Box and opened his own beauty parlor and hairdressers, an establishment with a title almost as cool as the Imperial Academy of Fighting Arts, the House of Dante. Keehan's businesses were booming, and his star was on the rise. Karate was slowly but surely becoming the national craze he envisioned it could be. His second national tournament was held in 1964 and was another huge success, but by the end of '64, he would find himself ousted from the organization he helped found, at war with Robert Trias, and slowly ceding control to his shadow self, Count Dante. Recently, I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube about Irish history, and I would honestly recommend all of these videos if you want to know a little more about the turbulent history of the rain-lashed rock that I happen to live on. But I'd be lying if I said that the part of me who spent years sitting through interminable, excruciating Irish history classes doesn't get slightly irked whenever they might make a mistake, or even just display a fundamental misunderstanding of what is an incredibly complex and delicate subject matter, the kind of misunderstanding a person who has grown up immersed in this history would never make. I bring this up because I need to apologize profusely to all Chicagoans and African Americans, because I'm about to do the exact same thing to you guys that these videos did to me, because I need to discuss Chicago has a long and particularly brutal history of racism. Even if we narrow the scope to only looking at incidents that took place during Keehan's era, it still paints a depressingly bleak picture of a city at war with itself. Chicago was essentially segregated for a large part of the 1900s, thanks to violent attacks on black Americans who attempted to move into white neighborhoods. These attacks were little more than terror tactics designed to funnel black families into specific districts as far away from white families as possible. In 1947, the year that John Keehan and John Gregory met for the first time, the Chicago Housing Authority moved 8 black families into an all-white district called Fernwood Homes. The residents' response to this was 3 nights of rioting that took more than 1,000 police officers to end. In 1951, as Keehan was becoming the boxing champion of high school, an even worse riot took place. A mob of 4,000 protested a black World War II veteran named Harvey Clark Jr. moving his family into the all-white neighborhood of Cicero. The riot that followed saw the Clark's home destroyed by the mob, the Clark family run out of Cicero, and the apartment building itself set fire to, which ironically destroyed both the Clarks and the white residents' homes. The only people to suffer any consequences for the riots were Clark's attorney, George Layton, who was accused of starting the riots by advising Clark that he had the legal right to live wherever he wanted, and the owner of the building itself, whose crime was renting an apartment to a black family. In 1966, while Keehan was teaching students at his Imperial Academy of Fighting Arts, not far from his dojo's door, Martin Luther King was leading a civil rights march and being pelted with bricks and bottles. King would say of Chicago, "I have never seen, even in Mississippi and Alabama, mobs as hostile and as hate-filled as I've seen here in Chicago." And now I'd like you to take a look at this picture of Keehan and his students and tell me if anything sticks out to you. John Keehan was the first instructor in America to teach black students, and the first instructor to promote black students to black belt. Keehan had grown up in a city filled to breaking point with racial violence, but from his time in Johnny Coolin's boxing gym, which opened its doors to all races, to the clubs he frequented, which were primarily black clubs, he had been immersed in black culture and surrounded by black training partners. Robert C. Brown was a kid looking to train karate in the 60s, but because of his skin color, was refused entry to every dojo in Chicago. The only gym that would take him in was the Imperial Academy of Fighting Arts. Brown said of Keehan, "He didn't care what colour I was. He readily accepted me and was glad to have me." During the Nigerian Civil War in 1967, Nigeria fought a war against a secessionist state called the Republic of Biafra. And I can already tell you're wondering where the fuck this is headed, but believe it or not, there is a weird link between the Nigerian Civil War and Chicago and karate. Karate and judo were being taught to native Biafrans living in Chicago in the hopes that it would help them survive on the battlefield when they returned to Biafra. But good luck using this shit in a war zone. It's unclear just how much of a hand Keehan had in training the Biafrans, but he was involved enough to be featured in an article in the Chicago Times titled "Handful of Biafrans Learned the Art of Killing." The article claimed 5 local instructors were teaching Biafran students how to fight back, and though Dante wasn't named, he was photographed in the article holding a letter he had sent to the Biafran Defense Ministry, so it's probably safe to say he was one of the 5 instructors and that at least one combatant in the Nigerian Civil War was killed with a dim mak. The article goes on to quote an instructor named Andrew Wilson, who stated that the rest of his students were African Americans who were learning karate because they were, quote, fed up with this racist society. It's not a stretch to say that the judo and karate that was taught at places like the Imperial Academy of Fighting Arts was important and empowering to the young black men and women simply trying to survive in a city that was at the time still playing host to unofficial segregation and race riots. In a day when people like Robert Brown were being turned away from dojos simply for being black, and civil rights marches were being brutally attacked for having the temerity to demand equal rights, Keehan's willingness to teach anyone regardless of colour was genuinely admirable. There are reports that Keehan himself was threatened with eviction for his acceptance of black students, but nonetheless refused to stop teaching them. And just as a brief aside, it's also worth mentioning the oversized influence that 1970s kung fu movies would have on black culture. It isn't hard to see why the stories resonated with young African Americans, as they routinely featured non-white actors like Bruce Lee fighting back against brutal oppressors, be they Japanese karate thugs or Chuck Norris's chest hair. They also gave starring roles to black actors like Jim Kelly and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at a time when Hollywood was filled with more vanilla than a Daily Wire branded porn site. Its influence can still be felt today in media like Afro Samurai, Ghost Dog, or everything Wu-Tang has ever done, to modern day blaxploitation parodies like Black Dynamite. And while Dante wasn't responsible for this phenomenon, without people like him pushing karate like it was ketamine throughout the 60s and 70s, there may not have been as big an audience for Shaw Brothers or Golden Harvest's kung fu movies when they finally released them in the US. While it is tempting to celebrate him for his progressive views, it would be unwise to try and venerate Dante as some paragon of inclusivity. One thing that will become clear by the end of this story is that for every one positive step forward Dante took, he does an ass-over-tits tumble backwards into an abyss of utter wrong-headedness. While his acceptance of African American students in a time when doing so could have led to your dojo being burned down was admirable, Dante would drop the hammer of dawn on all that goodwill when in one of his last ever interviews he referred to the Japanese American owner of Black Belt magazine, Mitoshi Uehara, as, quote, a slant-eyed bastard. And while it is unconfirmed, he had allegedly told an Asian karateka called Paul Kwan that, quote, all Orientals should be put into ovens. This was despite only a few years earlier claiming to be very much against any kind of discrimination against both black and Asian students. One person who was not impressed by Keehan's inclusivity was his former sensei and expert-level window washer, Robert Trias. While it may be shocking to learn that a man whose crew cut has the precision of a targeted drone strike could possibly be a racist, apparently awarding black people with black belts was introducing a little too much colour to the USKA for his liking. He allegedly demanded Keehan stop promoting them to black belt, and when Keehan refused the order, Trias booted him out of the USKA. In December of 1964, Trias issued a formal notice barring Keehan from the USKA, the organisation he himself had helped found.
Please be advised that Mr. John Keehan has been expelled from the organization for various violations against the Constitution of the USKA and under Article 11-5, and for conduct unbecoming the true spirit of Karate Do. Let us not at any time support those who seek to weaken and undermine the true karate way. Oh yeah, P.S. Fuck Mr. Rourke and Tattoo, aka Jerry and Easy. Sincerely yours, these motherfucking nuts. I don't love Easy, I don't love Jerry, I don't love Ruthless Records. Frankly, I don't love nothing they gotta do with...
Oh, the fucking AI's hallucinating again. Anyway,
what do you mean?
It's worth mentioning, however, that Robert Trias is very much dead, having ascended to that great arm-flailing kata in the sky in 1989, and isn't here to defend himself. He did refute the claims of being a racist and stated that Keehan was kicked out of the USKA for being a bit too much of a loose cannon who played by his own rules. And also he was a habitual liar and was telling people he was a guerrilla fighter in the Cuban Revolution and that Trias had once fought and defeated a live bear, all of which honestly sounds very on brand for Keehan.
What happened was he was given too much power too young and too fast. He had a lot of good ideas about promoting tournaments and other karate activities, but some of his ideas were so fantastically out of reason. Ideas that would include doing or saying anything, whether it was true or false. John wasn't a bad fellow. Apparently he just listened to the wrong people and got a little power hungry.
But far from hampering his plans, Keehan's banishment from the USKA just meant that he was now under even less scrutiny and was free to create his own karate organization. An organization where the martial artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would... Oh shit, that's the Bioshock monologue again, sorry. My mistake. Keehan founded the World Karate Federation and came one step closer to his dream of ascending past the restrictive and archaic rules of 1960s karate competitions and staging no-holds-barred, full-contact death matches. By the mid-60s, the man known as John Timothy Keehan was being buried alive in the coffin of Count Dante. The unhinged tendencies of the Count were now burrowing into Keehan's daily life. He took to wearing his extravagant outfits not just while bouncing, but in his day-to-day life. His leotard, cape and beret were now paired with a cane tipped with a 24-carat golden lion head, and his red hair now dyed jet black, making him look like a glam rock Count Chocula as he strolled the streets of Chicago. He also purchased that most essential of dojo necessities, a lion cub. The cub was purchased from a zoo in southern Illinois and was christened Aurelia by Dante. And shout out to the super responsible men and women of that zoo who saw Dante looking like Satan's own birthday clown and thought, yeah, this is a man who seems responsible enough to own a fucking lion. Aurelia first lived at Dante's apartment, but as she grew, he was forced to move her into the Imperial Academy of Fighting Arts. A corner of the gym was sectioned off and filled with sand to act as a litter tray, because who doesn't love training next to an open-air box of dust-rolled animal shit? Aurelia can even be seen lounging around the gym in this video, and Dante and Aurelia became a well-known sight on the streets of Chicago, because it's not easy to miss what looks to be a musical theater superhero taking his pet lion for a walk. As Aurelia grew, and the cost of feeding her frozen horse meat spiraled, Dante rented her out for photo ops, one of which took place at a Lions Club event in Quincy, Illinois. There she made headlines for biting the mayor of Quincy and realizing that maybe owning an aggressive wild animal without so much as a cage to put it into wasn't the Titanic-brained idea he once thought it was, Dante sold her to a businessman named Robert Geese. Aurelia promptly bit the shit out of Geese, leading him to make a panicked call to Dante demanding he take her back. Dante hung up on him, presumably while laughing maniacally. Around this time, Dante was trying to rebuild his own brand after the split with Trius. He had lost a lot of black belts such as Jimmy Jones after the split, as some had decided to stick with the USKA despite Dante's allegations of racism against Trius. But Dante still had well-regarded black belts of his own, such as Jim Koncevic, Woodrow Edgell, and Douglas Dwyer, students who were fiercely loyal to their sensei. But in the summer of 1965, Dante would begin to test the limits of his students' devotion.
Here we have Douglas Dwyer. He's one of my head instructors here, and he's going to demonstrate the breaking of hard objects, which happens to be, common house face brick.
Is there a trick to this, Doug?
No, there's no real trick to the art. Itself is developed through speed, form, and power.
On the 23rd of July 1965, Dante and Douglas Dwyer were doing some moderate to heavy drinking when discussion turned to what they should do in regards to unpaid wages they were owed by the Chicago Judo and Karate Center, a dojo on South Archer Avenue that both men had previously been instructors for. Dante had a box containing 14 dynamite blasting caps which he had used to blow up cactus plants while living in Phoenix. Alcohol, dynamite, and deaths do not make for the most level-headed of decision-making. By around 2 AM, Dwyer and Dante were well and truly fucking flutered, yet somehow managed to drive to the Judo and Karate Center to enact a flawless, foolproof plan to recoup their lost wages. What they'd do was, they'd use the dynamite to blow the place up. Dante taped 2 blasting caps to the windows of the dojo and attached a 40-inch long fuse, while Dwyer sat in the car ready to make a messy, drunken getaway. Dante attempted to light the fuse, but due to his inebriated state, the simple act of striking a match had the same difficulty level as navigating the average streaming website without contracting a fatal dose of malware. Dante burned through the entire book of matches and spent so long fucking around that he attracted the attention of the Chicago PD. As the cops approached, Dante and Dwyer took off at high speed, tossing the box of blasting caps out the window as they went. Being the animaniacs-ass villain that he was, Dante was apprehended fairly quickly and gave a perfectly cromulent explanation for the whole debacle.
Keehan stated that both he and Dwyer only wanted to break the window of the establishment in order to get rid of a little steam.
I don't know about you, but whenever I want to let my hair down, I too reach for the Semtex. Unfortunately for Dante, he couldn't have picked a worse time to indulge in his dynamite-fueled shenanigans. Chicago had played host to a series of bombing incidents in recent years, with the Chicago Tribune reporting that there had been 74 bomb and arson attacks since January 1st, 1963, most of which were believed to be mob-related. The FBI were taking this shit seriously, and Dante's little stunt had just landed him squarely on the Fed's radar. Both Dante and Dwyer were given 2 years probation, and while the FBI eventually cleared them of any links to the Chicago bombings, Dante remained under FBI surveillance for a further 8 years, the case only being closed in 1973. But attempted bombing, or as Dante would later call it, malicious mischief, wasn't even the most creative way in which Dante would test his students. Woodrow Edgell was a black belt who had recently been promoted to second dan, but some of Dante's other black belts didn't think he was quite ready for this responsibility. In order to test his readiness for second dan, the men had a rational, well-thought-out discussion on the pros and cons of a belt-based martial art as opposed to a non-rank-focused martial art like wrestling. No, I'm just kidding. Dante took Edgell for drinks and hired a random guy to assault him at the bar. This guy must have weighed 300 pounds, and he wasn't fat. He grabbed me around my chest and threw me across the room. I landed on a table, which luckily broke my fall. Edgel passed the test by defending himself in the most karate-ass way imaginable. I grabbed him by the throat and jabbed both of his eyeballs, and he started screaming. According to Edgel, he wasn't the only person to have undergone this test, with Dante seemingly favouring bar assaults as a means of pressure testing his black belts. Another of Dante's students to have their loyalty tested was Art Rapkin. Rapkin's life would turn out almost as interesting as the Count's himself. He was a karate instructor turned Bob Dylan impersonator turned cocaine smuggler who by the age of 27 would wind up being beaten and tortured in a Mexican prison. But in 1965, he was a teenage runaway who was living and training karate at Dante's dojo. One day, while chatting with Dante, Rapkin spoke of his desire to open his own dojo, but lamented the fact that he was only 16 and wasn't a black belt. Dante let him in on a little secret. The public at large don't know the difference between a real and fake black belt, and if this shit is black belt level, then anyone can be a black belt. Sure enough, by the age of 18, Rapkin owned his own dojo in Milwaukee, and Dante would attempt his wildest stunt yet, with his young protege Rapkin center stage. In an attempt to promote his latest karate tournament, Dante took Rapkin aside and told him, "I'm granting you the opportunity to do something amazing and special." That amazing and special opportunity was to risk a potentially fatal maiming by attempting to execute a live bull with one karate chop. Rapkin would perform this amazing and special feat of animal cruelty at Dante's latest karate hijinks, the 1967 World Karate Federation Tournament. While karate-based bull murder might sound absolutely fucking ludicrous, that's because it is. But bizarrely, there is a precedent in karate for this kind of bovine brutality. If you scour the pages of Black Belt, you may come across an advert like this for a man named Mas Oyama's Karate Secrets of Bovine Execution. According to the advert, Oyama, a Japanese karateka, was practically a one-man abattoir and responsible for more animal cruelty than DeviantArt's Sonic the Hedgehog category. He held a record of 3 bulls killed instantly with one karate chop and chopped the horns off 42 other bulls using his bare hands. Highly impressive statistics, or at least they would be if even a fraction of these claims had so much as a finger in the ass of reality. I don't believe a word of this, and you shouldn't either, because it is quite literally bullshit. A human being could no more one-shot a bull than they could eat a 1997 Subaru Impreza, which is the coolest car to ever have existed, but highly inedible. Having said all that, there is real video evidence of Oyama wrestling a bull, and while it is initially impressive, it becomes less impressive when you find out that it was a young, domesticated bull that was roped up, and Oyama blatantly, hilariously attempts to fake a scene of him karate chopping its horn off using what my parents' generation would have called trick photography. Seamless. Back in 1967, Art Rapkin was preparing for his own Oyama-esque feat of cattle decapitation. Dante rented a flatbed truck and strapped a 2,000-pound bull and the considerably smaller Rapkin in the back, and drove up and down State Street shouting through a megaphone that fans of animal cruelty should come to the Medina Temple that Saturday night to watch this teenager become the inspiration for One Punch Man. It's a testament to Dante's charisma and the sway he held over his students that at no point did Rapkin attempt to extricate himself from a situation that had spiraled hilariously beyond all logic and reason. Even while stuck in the back of a truck, with the eyes of his bovine aggressor locked firmly upon him, Rapkin believed he could do it simply because Dante told him he could do it. Thanks to Dante's influence, Rapkin had the kind of unearned self-belief of a prime Jaden Smith, self-belief which propelled him to Chicago's Medina Temple that Saturday night. But as he warmed up for his feat of Taurian theatrics, the police entered the arena and shut the whole thing down. At the 11th hour, Rapkin was saved from the most embarrassing way to die any martial artist not named David Carradine could endure, thanks to protesters who had gotten the event shut down due to its overt animal cruelty. Little did they know, the animal wouldn't have been the one suffering the cruelty, but their complaint was upheld anyway.
Anyway!
Luckily for Rapkin, he escaped the whole debacle without being gored to death, and luckily for Dante, there were no refunds. Rapkin's confidence never wavered. Even after the cancellation of the event, he was reported as saying he would, quote, kill it in the truck on State Street, if necessary. Despite the promise of a human versus bovine deathmatch, Dante's latest stunt hadn't exactly smashed box office records. Ticket sales were low, with only $8,600 in total sold, and fearing the cost of his overheads would outstrip the ticket sales, Dante concocted a flawless, foolproof plan to recoup any loss of income. He would steal the ticket sales, and that was it. Dante instructed Rapkin to take the money and then call the police with a bogus report saying the money had been stolen from him. Rapkin couldn't disobey his sensei, so did exactly that. The Chicago Tribune reported the theft, but seemed more amused that the supposed karate badasses couldn't protect themselves from being robbed than angry about the thousands of people who had been ripped off by Dante's catastrophic karate tournament. By the end of 1967, Keehan's transformation into Count Dante was complete. He had fully adopted the trappings of his alter ego. The flamboyant clothes were a permanent fixture. He drove a car with the Dante family crest emblazoned on its doors, and officially changed his name to Count Juan Rafael Dante, a name that goes harder than a batch loaf that's been left out overnight. And put it this way, if some asshole had named me, whatever the fuck this is, as soon as I turn 18, I'm changing my name to Count Juan Rafael Dante and hitting both my parents with a double dim Mac. Dante had also fallen out of love with karate by this time, whether this was down to his expulsion from the USKA, the poor reception to his public abattoir/karate tournament that year, or just a growing disillusionment with a martial art that required more air punching than the chorus of Shout at the Devil is unknown. But that year, Dante wrote a 4-page diss track titled Karate is for Sissies. The title was deliberately inflammatory because this essay was Dante going scorched earth on the craze he had helped create. Such was Dante's reputation in the world of martial arts at this point, and so outrageous was the article that the editors had to put a disclaimer on it stating that they neither agreed nor disagreed with Dante, but felt he should be heard out. Dante is often lumped into the category of fake martial artist, alongside no-touch knockout masters like George Dillman. But Dante doesn't belong anywhere near such genuine frauds as Dillman, and this article is proof positive of that. At one point in time, Dillman himself was a respected karate instructor who even taught karate to Muhammad Ali and rather hilariously attempted to demonstrate pressure point knockouts on Dan Severn, a man who prefers to suplex his opponents into unconsciousness. But eventually, Dillman realized that conning people is easier than training and embarked upon a new path of trying to convince people that karate had given him magical powers. Dante was a complete inversion of this. As he saw karate becoming less and less effective over time, he railed against the styles that placed more focus on kata than real sparring. He argued for practical effectiveness over pomp and ceremony, and called for karate to implement full contact sparring. The article ends with Dante describing what he considers the perfect fighting system, and here he was 100% prescient, as what he describes is an almost perfect description of UFC 1, decades before that event would change the world of martial arts forever.
No one art is an answer within itself. I believe in a combined art of which there are no rules, restricted striking areas, or outlawed techniques.
As Dante was falling in and out of love with karate, he looked to broaden his martial horizons. He started training with an alleged Shaolin monk named James Lee. Woodrow Edgell confirmed this story, as he too trained with Dante and Lee, but this was the late 60s, a time when people were probably still selling bridges to immigrants, so I'd say the chances that a Shaolin monk just happened to be living in Chicago were fairly slim. Regardless of whether or not he held legitimate monk status, Lee is pivotal to Dante's story, as he was apparently the man who taught Dante that most feared of all martial arts moves, the dreaded dim mak. The dim mak, also known as the death touch or poison hand, is like when an enemy casts doom in a Final Fantasy game. It's an attack that leaves no bruises or bleeding, but starts a countdown, at the end of which death is guaranteed.
Come on, touch of death, touch of death, touch of death.
The time between successful application of a dim mak and one's expiration varies. Some say hours, some say days. George Dillman, another dim mak expert, claimed that he had seen dim maks that had a death clock of up to a couple of weeks before killing its victim. The time of death may vary, but the outcome is immutable.
Soon you will be at peace.
Hey, quit it, Bart. Quit it. Hey, quit it, Mom!
Bart, don't use a touch of death on your sister.
Dante would make the deadly art of dim mak his main selling point towards the end of his life, and as such, I wanted to try and get to know the secrets behind the dim mak, in an effort to try and understand Dante himself a little bit better. There are endless books and articles on the application of the dim mak, and to try and approach this subject with an open mind, I read as many as was legal before my very existence becomes some kind of Geneva Code violation. For a secret technique that, according to Black Belt, is only taught to the most upstanding and righteous students, there are so many books on practical dim mak usage that anyone who can read can learn the deadly art of the death touch, and those of you who can't read can just learn from the pictures.
Don't even have to know where the point is with a one knuckle punch.
But the dim mak isn't just about murder. Like a Swiss Army knife of fingertip fuckery, there's a whole host of nifty tricks that the dim mak can do. If you want to make someone feel nauseous or anxious, there's a dim mak for that. If you want to make someone feel a little tired and need a lie down, there's a dim mak for that too. Could come in handy the next time your kid starts trying to talk to you about Roblox. This one guy found a loophole in Death Touch application where he used what looks to be a Colt 1911 to perform a dim mak. There's even a dim mak that causes instant, uncontrollable diarrhea, and I swear to God I'm not making this up, it's all in these books. The majority of dim mak manuals border on being unreadable. They're filled with reams of poorly drawn acupuncture charts that are so minute you'd need a fucking electron microscope to try and decipher them. They're also filled with page after page of incomprehensible instructions on how to strike anatomical locations that I'm not convinced any human even has. Let's take pericardium meridian PC1 Tianchi for example, which is located 1 kun lateral to the nipple in the 4th intercostal space. Thanks for clearing that up, cause I was confused there for a second. The best you can hope for from the average dim mak manual are low-res black and white photos of how to attack death point mind-killing strike points, such as Triple Warmer 17B.
Bring both hands down on either side of Triple Warmer 23
Several of these turgid ninja nonsense tutorials were written by none other than the clown prince of ninjutsu himself, Ishida Kim. One such book, Poison Hand, spends most of its read time jerking off Count Dante like he was a cross between Sephiroth and a Sith Lord, and then attempts to illustrate all 77 Poison Hand techniques of the Dante fighting system, which seems to involve landing 77 consecutive blows on minute, pinpoint sections of the anatomy, a feat that would be like trying to hit 77 bullseyes in a row with hands made of wet cement. I've only mastered 76 of the 77 hit combo, but thankfully Ishida Kim was on deck to show us how it's done.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to witness, without doubt, the most savage and terrifying self-defense form known to man. It is composed of 27 of the deadliest poison hand techniques ever devised, each one of which is guaranteed to kill, cripple, or maim any attacker. It is not for the squeamish, nor the weak at heart.
Don't laugh, that man died. The definitive treatise on fingertip murder wasn't written by Ishida Kim or some middle-aged man with a ponytail, but by Count Dante himself. In 1968, Dante released this, The World's Deadliest Fighting Secrets. The booklet was his very own papal bullshit, which he firmly nailed upon the door of martial arts. It would become the most enduring part of his legacy, thanks in part to the adverts for this manual of mayhem, which ran in the back of Marvel Comics. In the years since, Dante's comic book advertisements have become iconic. In stark colours, the Count looms large over the page in full poison hand pose, his fingers twisted into slashing, rending, murdering claws, as the headline below him screams that this is the deadliest man alive. Purchase of the World's Deadliest Fighting Secrets also comes with free membership to a secret fisting club called the Black Dragon Fighting Society, and you can guarantee that I have never wanted to be a part of any society more than this, so I hope that membership is transferable because I bought an original 1968 copy on eBay for research purposes.
Yes, this is the deadliest and most terrifying fighting art known to man, and without equal. Its maiming, mutilating, disfiguring, paralyzing and crippling techniques are known by only a few people in the world. An expert at dim mak could easily kill many judo, karate, kung fu, aikido and gung fu experts at one time with only fingertip pressure, using his murderous poison hand weapons. Instructing you step by step through each move in this manual is none other than Count Dante, the deadliest man who ever lived.
The World's Deadliest Fighting Secrets is, without hyperbole, the greatest book I've ever read in my entire life. And I've read the novelization of Ghostbusters. The book begins with an introduction to Count Dante. Count Dante, an immediate descendant of European nobility and holder of an 8th degree black belt, is somewhat of a legend in the karate world today. If it wasn't obvious that he wrote this about himself, it will be after this sentence. The strikingly handsome director of the World Karate Federation looks more like a movie star than a karate master, and then descends into typical Dante madness by claiming, on September 1st, 1967, the Directive Committee of the World Federation of Fighting Arts declared Count Dante the world's deadliest fighting master, in recognition of his having defeated the world's foremost fistic and grappling masters in no-holds-barred combat. The introduction to Dante ends with this rather cheerful sentence informing us that Count Dante is a world-famous hairstylist and beauty consultant, and an avid devotee of classical singing. But if you thought Dante's introduction went harder than Havel the Rock, then just wait till you hear about the Black Dragon Fighting Society. The Black Dragon Fighting Society is a world-renowned fighting arts organization. The secret society teaches the most savage, deadly, and terrifying fighting arts known to man. Many famous world champions have failed to gain entrance into the forbidden society that is sworn to the art of death. The exact membership and training are closely guarded secrets of the membership who are sworn to secrecy and joined together through their initiation ceremony of blood. Sadly, 7 pages in is kinda where 98% of the awesome shit in Dante's booklet ends. What follows is roughly 150 individual pictures of Doug Dwyer getting eye poked, eye gouged, fish hooked, and got your nosed. There's also a dim Mac timetable, as if the deadly hands of Dante were a fucking city bus. But this does inform us that apparently the dim Mac is more or less effective at certain times and on certain body parts, leading to the revelation that between 8 to 10 PM an anal dim Mac is at its most potent. I can't say that the world's deadliest fighting secrets made me a better fighter, but one thing I do know is that if I ever have to fight Douglas Dwyer, he is fucked. Sadly for ninjas everywhere, based on the evidence and on my research, the dim Mac is not real. While I can confirm that if someone punches you with a pointed knuckle in a pressure point area, that shit is painful, but it's not going to make an attacker volcanically shit himself, need a lie down, or drop dead. And even if it could, dim Mac falls into the same trap as something like Krav Maga or any martial art that promises to teach you moves too deadly for the octagon. If your entire martial art is based on eye gouging, maiming, or killing your opponent, how the fuck are you even able to practice it without turning your dojo into a funeral home for incontinent blind people? Dante didn't invent the concept of the death touch, but he was the first to package it and market it to gullible comic book readers, and ultimately spawned an entire cottage industry of death touch conmen. Reading Dante's Manual of Murder won't make you a better fighter. In fact, it might actively make you worse. But as I stared at that price tag and realized that when it's adjusted for inflation, this book cost almost $100 in 1968, I did gain a deeper understanding of the man himself, because to quote Johnny Rotten,
"Ever get the feeling you've been cheated? Good night."
What's up guys, it's your boy, AI Napoleon. Did you know that every year thousands of children are born without a triple warmer 17B? This debilitating illness causes overuse of metaphors and similes, and a terminal attraction to Valentina Shevchenko. For the price of one medium-sized Terry's chocolate orange, you can bring warmth to the warmerless, and ensure no child grows up feeling like some kind of fucking triple warmerless freak. People will buy any old garbage, which explains the enduring popularity of the Strokes. Yeah, that's right, Strokes fans. Thought I forgot about you, did you? But it also explains why the world's deadliest fighting secrets made Dante a millionaire. Despite having less quality control than a Temu sweatshop, mail-order ninjas all across America had purchased a copy of Dante's murderous ramblings, and Dante, seeing yet another angle, had kept his overheads low by having a local nunnery take care of all the shipping. The end result was that Deadliest Fighting Secrets had done more for Dante's fortunes than any karate class or tournament ever had. While this booklet seems almost quaint in an era where you can probably fire up TikTok and explore the beheading hashtag, the American karate establishment was so enraged by the mere anarchy that Dante had loosed upon the world that they could have landed a punch in anger. Black Belt refused to cover any more of Dante's tournaments, and the heads of American karate were calling for Dante and anyone who trained with him to be barred from taking part in any tournament in the United States. Ed Parker even threatened to expel his own students if they so much as set foot in one of Dante's dojos. His last tournament in 1967 had been advertised as a knockout tournament that featured no-holds-barred, full-contact fights. The very notion of actually landing punches at a karate competition was so controversial that almost every single person involved in American karate treated Dante like he'd just been sexting a minor on Discord. In the April 1967 issue of Black Belt, everyone from June Rhee to that bitch-ass Robert Trias took the opportunity to express their absolute disgust at the notion of people actually landing punches and kicks.
I can only say what disgraceful attitudes the promoters of such a tournament must have towards Karate-Do. This will for certain affect the growth of karate in this country. It may be the beginning of the end for the science some of us have dedicated our lives to in promoting brotherhood, sportsmanship, competition, and tournament.
By 1969, Dante's name was so toxic that Black Belt had stopped covering any tournament in Chicago, not just his. The situation had gotten so bad that by April of that year, Black Belt staged a mafioso-style sit-down with Dante and all the big names in karate to try and stem Dante's dismal tide. The whole meeting was reported on in a Black Belt article called The Trial of Count Dante. Dante's trial was basically a whole bunch of karate dorks whinging about the danger of not pulling your punches. It seemed like the instructors of the day genuinely believed karate was so powerful that allowing punches and kicks to land was essentially playing Russian roulette with a fucking Death Star. A karate practitioner named Walt Bartowski said of Dante's tournaments, "If you're going for contact, you will have one winner and 35 dead contestants." But while all the established heads of karate seemed to have their knives out for him, there was one person present at the trial of Count Dante who was resolutely in his corner. Described by Black Belt as a voluptuous young girl with a tight-fitting white dress and the long contemporary hairstyle one might find at the Playboy Club, was Dante's then-girlfriend, who, for the sake of privacy, I'm going to refer to as Jill Valentine from Resident Evil. Valentine and Dante went back as far as high school. He was originally supposed to be her prom date, but stood her up to go do karate in the garage instead. After seeing modelling photos of her a few years later, Dante realised maybe he'd fucked up and so got back in touch with her in a completely unsubtle, I wouldn't have stood you up if I'd realised you'd turn out this hot kind of way. Valentine worked as a bunny at Chicago's Playboy Club, hence her long contemporary hairstyle, but once her and Dante began dating, she quit the club and Dante put her at the front and centre of his operation. She worked the reception desk at the Imperial Academy, he featured her in his hairstylist photo shoots, and began teaching her karate. Valentine was given a black belt, and Dante would christen her the Dragon Lady. Such was the couple's reputation in Chicago, they even made appearances on a local TV show called The Chicago Show, where the Playboy bunny with the black belt, as she was known, broke boards with her bare hands. But Valentine was working behind the scenes too, helping to promote Dante's tournaments. She gave an interview with the Chicago Tribune where, once they were done objectifying her, up to and including publishing her fucking measurements, she was allowed to tell them about her plan to march on Muhammad Ali's house and challenge him to fight Dante at his no-holds-barred tournament.
We've issued a personal challenge to Cassius Clay. We're going to march on his house just for fun. We really think he might want to participate.
And while it might have seemed ridiculous at the time, less than a decade later, Ali would take part in a matchup with pro wrestler Antonio Inoki, so really, Dante and the Dragon Lady were just a few years too early. For a time, Dante and Valentine really were a power couple of karate. But after the attempted bombing of the Chicago Judo and Karate Center and his publishing of the world's deadliest fighting secrets, Dante was a pariah in the karate world. The farcical sit-down with black belt had changed nothing, despite Valentine's own protestations that day.
I object most vehemently to your obvious disdain of Count Dante. You very effectively omitted many of the good points regarding Mr. Dante's efforts to spread karate throughout the Midwest area, and deleted none of the shenanigans.
Despite her best efforts, he was still persona non grata, and the failure of his 1967 bullfighting tournament had done nothing to help his mood. Dante had always seen himself as a winner, and none of this looked like winning to him. Feeling attacked from all sides, he began the inevitable, predictable decline into drugs, starting with amphetamines, and encouraged Valentine to do likewise. He grew paranoid and jealous. Valentine had so impressed the staff at the Chicago show that she'd been offered a recurring spot, a spot that Dante felt by rights should have been his. He became emotionally abusive after revealing to Valentine his theft of the gate receipts for the 1967 tournament. He pulled a gun on her and told her, "If you tell anyone what goes on here, you're dead." And as is depressingly predictable, he ultimately became physically abusive. Valentine's black belt was all for show, despite telling the Tribune of an incident where she had broken the nose of a guy who tried to grab her on the subway. She was no black belt. The board she had karate chopped in the Chicago show had been pre-cut. Physically, she was no match for Dante. But strength isn't found in coloured belts and kung fu kicks, and as the abuse began to escalate, she found a strength all of her own to fight back with. One morning while making him breakfast, something snapped inside the one-time dragon lady. She hurled a pan of boiling grease at Dante and attempted to flee.
He knew I wasn't going to take it anymore. It was at that point he realized he didn't have any control over me.
He tried to grab her, but she slashed his arm with a kitchen knife and freed herself from his own personal descent to hell.
After that, I pretty much just saw him in my nightmares.
Drug addicted, increasingly paranoid, and now utterly alone. Whatever good had resided within John Timothy Keehan was gone, and only Count Dante remained. The point of no return is a phrase that originated in the aviation world. It's shorthand for the point at which you have burned too much fuel to return to your starting point. You can only forge ahead into the howling dark. There is no turning back. Dante's point of no return was April 23rd, 1970. That evening, Dante made a phone call to a rival dojo called the Green Dragon Society. He told them, "A bunch of guys are on their way to bust your joint up." The exact reason as to why Dante picked a fight with the Green Dragons is still unknown. Maybe only he and Jim Koncevic will ever really know. Dante's lawyer, Bob Cooley, claimed that the dojo war started after the leader of the Green Dragons called Dante a pussy. Russell Berkman, owner of the Green Dragon dojo, would later tell police that this was simply a business rivalry gone wrong. He said, "Koncevic students preferred our school and came here." Or maybe as Dante's relevance and reach in the Chicago martial arts scene faded, this was a misguided attempt to assert dominance, to remind everyone just who the fuck he really was. Whatever the reason, by that evening, the wheels of Dante's plan were irrevocably in motion. At around 10:30 p.m, Dante, backed up by Jim Koncevic and other members of the Black Dragon Fighting Society, arrived at the Green Dragon's dojo. Koncevic was the owner of a dojo called the Taijutsu School of Judo and Karate, and had brought several of his students with him, and another Black Dragon instructor named Michael Felkoff. Dante, brandishing a fake police badge, hammered on the door of the dojo and shouted, "We're from the Sheriff's Police, you're all under arrest." When the Green Dragons opened the door, they were invaded by what they later described as a gang of thugs, led by Dante. They swarmed the hall and faced off with around a dozen Green Dragons. But the Green Dragons weren't just a karate school. They practiced with weapons like spears and swords, and it was even reported that one man who took part in the brawl was armed with a fucking mace. As such, the room was littered with so many usable weapons it looked like a Streets of Rage level. Dante and his crew had brought nothing but karate to a sword fight. Much like the reason for the invasion, the exact details of who started the brawl are unclear. Some reports said Dante and the Green Dragon owners were in a back room when the melee broke out. Others said Dante missed the entire brawl by hiding underneath a desk. The only constant between variations of the story is that as the brawl kicked off, Jim Konzovic grabbed one of the Green Dragons and hit him with a judo throw called an Osoto Gari, and after that, mere anarchy was loosed upon the Green Dragon's dojo. According to one witness, Dante took a hit early on and, quote, went down like a 10-pin. But to hear Dante's version, he used his poison hand to pluck out the eyeball of a green dragon named Jose Gonzalez. Konzovic was the largest of the black dragons, at 6'1" and 250 pounds, and as such, he tanked the brunt of the assault. He had been slashed multiple times by the Green Dragon blades, but was still fighting. He grabbed a Green Dragon named Jerome Greenwald and began laying into him with punches. Greenwald fought back by plunging a 10-inch blade into Konzovic's abdomen. Things had spiraled hopelessly, fatally out of control, and the Black Dragon's morale was crumbling. Realizing just how dire his situation was, Konzovic shouted, "Let's get the fuck out of here," and staggered towards the door, only to find it locked. As the Black Dragons attempted to burst through the door, from the rear of the hall, the same man who had been thrown by Konzovic at the beginning of the brawl picked up a spear and hurled it towards the fleeing dragons. Jim Konzovic had sustained 36 slash and stab wounds, enough to kill any man, but fate would deal him one final, fatal blow. Whether the outcome of good aim or bad luck is a matter for debate, but as he attempted to flee, the spear thrown from the back of the hall found its mark and pierced Konzovic's neck. Dante's oldest student and one of his closest friends was bled white. With what strength he had left, he fled from the dojo and collapsed and died on a cold and dirty sidewalk. The police arrived just as the Black Dragons were scattering into the bitter Chicago night. The brief, brutal dojo war of 1970 was over. In the wake of the dojo war, Jim Konzovic was dead, and the Green Dragon named Jose Gonzalez was in hospital, where doctors were trying to save the eye that Dante had claimed to have plucked out with an eyeball-based dim mak. Both Black and Green Dragon alike had been arrested, and Dante was charged with aggravated battery. But Chicago's accountability statute held that, as the instigator of the brawl, he was potentially responsible for Konzovic's death, and as such, he was also staring down the far more serious prospect of a murder charge. This wasn't some marijuana cigarettes,
smoke weed,
malicious mischief, or a drunken prank. Dante was looking at serious time, and needed a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. Realizing the depth and breadth of the shit that he was currently mired in, he needed a Saul Goodman-esque, crooked-ass lawyer that was willing to break the law to get him acquitted. Enter Bob Cooley. Cooley was a beat cop who had only just taken the bar exam, and had yet to find out whether or not he'd even passed. But despite this, he appealed to the Count's sensibilities as he routinely hung around with high-ranking Chicago mobsters.
I was out in the street patrolling and I get a call to come into the station. So, and as I walk in there, I see this strange-looking character. I see this guy, but he's wearing a cape and he's wearing a mesh see-through outfit. Where you can see his whole body basically. I just see him standing there at the desk, and I look at him because this guy looks like some kind of a freak. He's dressed like a Superman or whatever. And I walk behind the desk, and the sergeant says, "Here, Bob, somebody wants to talk to you." And I look up and I walk over, and he goes, he says, "I'm Count Dante." He said, and I'd like to talk to you.
Cooley would pass the bar exam and go on to become a lawyer for the mob. By the 1980s, he would turn FBI informant and help put most of the Chicago outfit in jail. But in April of 1970, when he met Count Dante, he was still just a beat cop who had yet to pass the bar exam. Dante was convinced Cooley would rig the outcome of the trial, though Cooley, till this day, swears that the ruling was reached legitimately. In hindsight, Dante probably shouldn't have worried quite so much, as this was the 1970s, an era where Jimmy Savile himself couldn't get arrested, so nobody would bat an asshole if a little thing like aggravated battery and murder was tossed out of court. The Count walked free after the judge shouted, "You're each as guilty as each other. I've never seen such a pack of lunatics in my life. What were you doing with weapons like a mace? What were you doing tearing somebody's eye out? These aren't medieval times. You're both wrong, and I don't see a finding of guilty either way." Dante had confessed to Cooley that he wouldn't survive in prison due to his intense claustrophobia, and after being found not guilty, he felt he owed his lawyer not only his gratitude, but his life. The pair became friends, but their friendship had a short shelf life. Cooley had spent years surrounded by unstable mobsters and recognized a time bomb when he saw it. Post-Dojo War and the death of Jim Koncevic, Dante was never the same. He'd always been reckless, but now he was set on a path of self-destruction and seemingly uncaring of who was destroyed alongside him. Chaos attracts chaos, and by the early 70s, the Count had managed to pull into his orbit a purely chaotic roster consisting of a mobbed-up crooked lawyer and one of America's first cocaine smugglers. If he was an exile in the karate world pre-Dojo War, then post-Dojo War, his name was practically radioactive. As such, he spent less time at his dojo and more time partying at the Playboy Mansion with Bob Cooley. He had also taken to hanging out with a psychic called the Great Alfonso. According to the FBI files, by 1971, even his Imperial Academy dojo had gone bust and was now a beauty shop. Dante even attempted to crack Hollywood, but made the rookie mistake of mentioning in his bio that he had killed more people than are in the average K-pop band, which probably wasn't the best way to make friends in the movie biz. Bob Cooley recounted a story that perfectly summed up Dante's deteriorating mental state at the time.
And I'm on the couch sitting next to my girlfriend, and John is sitting across the way, and I had gotten him a glass of wine, and we're sitting down, and the Count said, "Bob, tell her how tough you are." And I just said, "That's okay." And he said, "No, tell her how tough you are." And a second time, I just, brushed him off. He came walking over towards me, and with his left hand, he made a motion, and I thought he broke my jaw. He hit my jaw with his fingers, and I thought he broke my jaw. And and I'm in a state of shock, and suddenly he grabs his hand and he says, "I should cut off this hand. You saved my life." And he said, "You're the closest person in the world to me." And he's crying. And I'm thinking to myself, what the fuck? And then he goes over and he goes against the wall. He stands up there against the windows. He says, "Get out your gun." He said, "Bob, point it at me and say now before you pull the trigger, and I'll stop the bullet." And I look at him. I'm thinking to myself, this guy is off the deep, going straight off the deep end. He had been acting a little strange over the last maybe week or two or three, and I suspected now maybe he's doing some drugs a little bit rather than just from drinking. That was the end of my running around with the Count after that. I basically wanted to try to, in fact, when he would call and let's get together, I avoided him and I stopped running around with him. I'm worried that this guy is just, losing it.
Thanks to Art Rapkin's Colombian vacations, Dante had unlocked a life hack for unlimited free cocaine and was using as much as Rapkin could supply him with. But Dante wanted in on the business, as a distributor, not just a consumer. But Rapkin wasn't stupid and realized just how much of a liability Dante was at this point. Involving him in a drug smuggling plot would have been like asking Crash Bandicoot to perform Princess Diana's eulogy. Rapkin refused to bring him into his operation, and eventually cut all ties with his former sensei. But Dante was desperate to join the gabagool-infused world of professional crimery, or deep dish pizza, whatever the fuck it is mob guys eat in Chicago, and he was badgering Bob Cooley to make introductions on his behalf to the Chicago mob. Cooley, like Rapkin, wisely refused, after realizing that introducing someone as bereft of hinges as Dante to the mob was a worse idea than introducing Kurt Cobain to short-barreled shotguns. But Dante was not to be deterred, and if organized crime wouldn't come to him, then he himself would organize the crime. He took over a used car dealership, which in the 70s was like wearing a billboard that says, "I do crime." He also expanded his empire into the pointy-breasted world of 1970s porn. But Dante didn't expand in the "I'd like to buy you out" kind of way. His expansion was a far more Russia-Ukraine kind of expansion, in that he just walked into a sex shop, kicked the rightful owner out, and claimed, "This is mine now." If Dante wanted an introduction to the mob, he was about to get one, in much the same way as the dinosaurs were formally introduced to an asteroid.
And Joey calls me and he said, "Bob," he said, "you got to come over here. Some guys came over here. They're going to kill the Count."
The guy whose shop he had annexed was paying protection money to the mob, and had never missed a payment of his street tax, as the crime fellows called it. Soon after Dante's special shopping operation, two guys armed with shotguns turned up at his car dealership with a simple order: kill Count Dante on sight. The two men who came to kill him were Pete Gucci and Sammy Anarino, who in turn worked for Jimmy the Bomber Coutura, who himself had worked directly for Al fucking Capone. These were not unserious people, and Dante had just pissed all over their loafers. Dante had made one of his former students, Joey Casello, a partner in the car dealership. Casello was on site the day that Gucci and Anarino stopped by, and he put in a panicked call to Bob Cooley telling him the Count's life was in imminent danger. Cooley intervened on the Count's behalf, and arranged to sit down between Dante and the mob to straighten things out and maybe save the Count's life. But even under the threat of being turned into a chalk outline on a Chicago sidewalk, the Count still couldn't help but be the Count.
Anyhow, I get a hold of the Count, and for the first time in his life, I saw the Count was nervous. You know, he was real nervous. And so I take him over there, and when I get to the table, Sammy Anarino is sitting there, and he's got his thumb over a fork, and he's putting his thumb over the fork, and he's telling, and he says, "And I pull out eyes with this." And the Count says to him, "And I pull out eyes with with my hands," and he's making that gesture he made in that book, The Black Hand. And I said, "What the fuck is going on? Come on, enough of this bullshit."
Cooley arranged for Dante to pay the mob $25 grand, and for that, he would get to keep both the sex shop and his life. He probably overpaid for both, but there was a part of the bargain Cooley hadn't negotiated, because despite his best efforts to keep them separate, Dante had finally been granted his introduction to the Chicago mob. Realizing that Dante was a pointy-bearded powder keg, Cooley tried to distance himself from the Count. Until one evening in early October of 1974, when Dante turned up uninvited to his office. According to Cooley, Dante looked worse for wear. He was out of shape. Cooley described him as looking like Elvis in his last days. He was no longer wearing his extravagant outfits, and he had a manic energy about him. But he had come to Cooley with news of a once-in-a-lifetime deal that he was ready to cut him in on. Dante said,
"You're one of the best friends I have in the world, so I want to cut you in on something I have going. You could pick up $1 million in cash for your ends, but if I tell you what it is, you can't back out. This is going to be the biggest thing in history."
It would take a special kind of idiot to jump at an opportunity to earn an easy $1 million offered to you by a cokehead, and thankfully, Cooley was not that idiot. He wisely told the Count, "John, I don't want to know anything about it. I don't want to be involved. Besides, in my own experience, $1 million shouldn't come easy. Take my advice and forget whatever it is you've got planned." A few weeks later, on October 21st, 1974, news broke of the biggest heist in American history. $4.3 million was stolen from the Purolator vault in Chicago. Cooley had absolutely no doubt in his mind that this was the once-in-a-lifetime plan Dante had tried to bring him in on. His suspicions were further aroused when it turned out the masked gang that pulled off the heist contained multiple members of the Chicago mob, including Pete Gucci, one of the guys who had been sent to kill Dante in his dealership. The Count was never charged with anything relating to the heist, though his potential involvement was mentioned in the papers, but not in a particularly flattering manner. Others to be heard from in the quiz reportedly include James the Bomber Couture and a former hairdresser who wears a cloak and calls himself Count Dante. Dante wisely skipped town anyway. He left Chicago and headed for Fall River, Massachusetts. The Chicago karate scene may have been done with him, but he wasn't done with karate. He would start afresh, somewhere his name was less poisonous. The Count had one last show left in him. But not just any show, because Dante was about to stage the Taunton death matches. After the dojo war, a lot of Dante's students had realized that he was slightly clinically insane and cut ties with him. Even Douglas Dwyer, a man who had stood beside him through dynamite plots and enough eye pokes to blind the average Bloodborne boss, had distanced himself from Dante. The Count's move to Fall River, Massachusetts had been one of necessity. His days as the biggest name in karate in Chicago were over. He would never be accepted there again. But in a pre-internet era, simply moving a few states away from whatever chaos you had caused was like driving through a pay and spray in Grand Theft Auto. With a little distance between him and Chicago, Dante was able to relaunch his Black Dragon Fighting Society. He established a dojo in Fall River and found a replacement for Jim Koncevic in a man named Bill Aguirre Jr. The dojo in Fall River was a perfect representation of the Dante brand of karate, as it was equipped with a fully working bar, at which the Black Dragons would train the best ways to defend yourself in a bar fight and also get drunk. It was in his time at Fall River that he conceived the Taunton death matches. Dante was no stranger to the concept of the death match. He had claimed to have killed 25 men in a secretive Southeast Asian death match, an idea which would be co-opted by a young Frank Dukes and converted into the story for Bloodsport. It's unknown if this was a different death match to the one mentioned on his Hollywood headshot, where he claimed to have killed 13 people, and shouldn't be confused with the 25 people he killed when he was definitely in Vietnam, but I'm sure once your body count goes past double digits, it's easy to lose track of these things.
I would say I've killed over 50. That included the military, on the street, and in competition. I've also maimed about 25 people. Either blinded them, took one eye out, two eyes, or either completely taken the testicles off with a groin slap and twist and tear.
Held in March of 1975, the Taunton death matches were essentially just another full-contact tournament, but with a sexed-up title. Advertised with the manic coke dad energy one might come to expect from Dante, the flyers screamed of kung fu death matches, full contact, no holds barred, submission or knockout only bloodbaths. Dante also called out all New England dojos in a show up or shut up challenge. Surprisingly, none of them showed up, and instead a large part of the show was dedicated to judo demonstrations, sword fighting demonstrations, and some guy broke boards with his head and ate glass like a circus sideshow. So far, the Taunton death matches seemed like a classic Dante bait and switch. But this is a genuinely important, yet almost completely forgotten part of martial arts history. As once all the glass eating and board breaking was out of the way, the event essentially became UFC 1, but in 1975. Boxers fought wrestlers, karatekas fought street fighters. There were no weight classes, no rules. Hair pulling and even dick punching were legal. One fight was almost stopped due to excessive testicle pounding, and by the end of the night, the canvas was painted with blood and populated with tumbleweeds of human hair. Big fought small, trained fought untrained, and one man fought 2 matches back to back. He lost both of them, but it was still impressive for the time. The description of some of these fights genuinely sounds like proto-MMA. One fight ended after a fighter took down his opponent, gained top control, and rained down shots until the fight was called off. The reaction to the death matches was one of universal disgust. The issue of Official Karate magazine, which reported on the event, likened the contestants to animals and called them whores, saying they were prostituting themselves and the martial arts. The people in attendance, however, loved it. The Taunton death matches would be the last event Dante ever staged, and as an epitaph, it would serve as a perfect summation of Dante himself. Extreme in its conception, reviled by the establishment, and almost completely ignored by the world at large. After the death matches, Dante made one final trip back to Chicago, but this wasn't the same man who had once staged the biggest karate tournament in the world and harbored grand plans to make karate bigger than boxing. The Count Dante of 1975 was gripped by a vicious cycle of paranoia fueled by his cocaine usage. He would call black belt writer Masad Ayub at 2 or 3 in the morning, racked with fear. He was convinced the mob were coming for him thanks to his supposed involvement in the Purelator heist. During one such late-night call, Dante confessed, "I think they're gonna kill me. If I stay here, I haven't got 6 months left." But Dante was wrong about that, because 6 months was an overestimation. On the 24th of May 1975, Dante called up Bob Cooley and invited him over. When Cooley arrived, Dante grabbed him by the arm and said, "I want to show you something." That something was a cardboard box overflowing with money. Cooley, who had been around enough mobsters to know big money when he saw it, estimated it to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. He also couldn't help but notice that Dante was clearly under the influence of more than just alcohol. Cooley told Dante, "Count, I'm glad for you. I hope you enjoy it. Just don't tell me how you got it." Cooley made his excuses and left. It would be the last time he ever saw Dante alive. The next day, he received a call from Dante's wife, Krista. She was hysterical and begging Cooley to come help. When he arrived, he found Dante in the bathroom, slumped against the toilet. He was unresponsive and blood was streaming from his nose. Krista said some men had come to see him earlier, but wouldn't say who they were. All she would say was that this must have been their doing. John Timothy Keehan, also known as Count Juan Rafael Dante, was dead. He was only 36 years old. No autopsy was performed on Dante. His body was cremated before one could be performed, and the official verdict for his death was ruled as internal hemorrhaging caused by a bleeding ulcer. In his book, When Corruption Was King, Bob Cooley alludes to it having been a mob-related fatality, but the most accepted line is that this was simply a case of natural causes. Masad Ayub reported that in his last months, Dante had been losing weight and looked sickly. At the Taunton death matches, he only sat at a judge's table watching the event. He did no demonstrations and ignored multiple challenges that were thrown at him. Unusual behavior for a man who would routinely fight people for making fun of his hat. It's also worth mentioning that, shortly before his own death, Dante came into a sizable inheritance due to the death of his father. And knowing his love for theatrics, it's not beyond the realm of possibility to suggest that maybe the Count knew he was sick, knew his days were numbered, but rather than have the world think that someone as deadly as he would be taken out by something as mundane as cancer, he concocted one last flight of fancy, conveniently telling reporters and friends about how he was on the run from the mob, and he was the most wanted man in Chicago. And when he felt his hour was at hand, he called up his friend and showed him a box full of money, legally bequeathed to him by his father, under the pretense that this was the spoils of the biggest heist in American history. Whatever the truth is, Dante left this life as he lived it, under weird fucking circumstances. In the wake of his death, the Black Dragon Fighting Society and the Dante fighting system were bequeathed to his disciple in Fall River, Bill Aguirre Jr. The Black Dragons are still a thing, as this hilarious footage can attest to, but despite Dante's insistence on realistic fighting methods, I wouldn't expect to see the Dante fighting system take over as the new MMA metagame anytime soon, because it's too fucking deadly for the octagon. Aguirre Jr. died in 2005, and since then, his son, Bill Aguirre III, has been locked in a room temperature battle for ownership of the BDFS name with none other than Ishida Kim. The beef between Kim and Aguirre is as cripplingly stupid as it is funny. Some of the lowlights include the time Ishida Kim tried to franchise the rights to the BDFS name to Aguirre by selling him a certificate that has "Go fuck yourself" hidden in the text. He also has an entire page of his website dedicated to shit-talking Aguirre. Here's a picture of Aguirre III, his daughter and a buddy. Does this really live up to the standard of martial arts excellence we aspire to? I think not. Does anyone actually think that this fat pig is capable or worthy of leading a martial arts fellowship? Ishida Kim could not be contacted for comment, because he's invisible. Dante was a visionary to some degree, attempting to steer karate away from no-contact, glorified dance recitals into a more realistic form of combat. He pioneered cross-training and believed that only by mixing martial arts could you make something truly effective. If you change the name of the Taunton Death Matches to the more grounded Taunton Mixed Fighting Styles Tournament, there's a good chance we'd be talking about it as the real birth of MMA. It's also not a coincidence that full contact tournaments took off in popularity and mainstream acceptance only after Dante did it first. He was hated for it at the time, but there's a direct line that can be drawn from Dante and his full contact tournaments of the 60s and 70s to the popularity of kickboxing in the 80s and 90s. At the time of his death, it probably seemed like Dante would leave no real legacy to speak of. He was most famous for a failed bombing attempt and reckless endangerment causing the death of a student. But while the establishment at the time saw his ideas for full contact fights and mixing styles as some kind of disgusting aberration, some corruption of the sanctity of martial arts, it's only with the benefit of hindsight that we can really see how oversized his influence would be. But Dante was not a good person. He was an abuser, a criminal, and seemed to possess a naked racism for Asians. It was only through pure dumb luck that the dynamite plot and the dojo war only ended up causing the death of one person. In his private life, John Keehan was truly a monster. If any woman ever utters the sentence, "After that I only saw him in my nightmares about you," you may be beyond redemption. The great irony of this story is that his public persona, Count Dante, world's deadliest man, killer of over 25 men in secret death matches, was more likable and less monster than John Timothy Keehan. French filmmaker Francois Truffaut said, "There's no such thing as an anti-war movie." His point was that whether intentional or not, All war films end up glorifying war to some extent due to the nature of cinema. I didn't intend to glorify any of Dante's actions, but I'm also painfully aware that it's probably not possible to make a 2-hour-long video about the man without doing it to some extent, intentional or not. The FBI wrapped up their investigation into Dante in late 1973. After 8 years of shadowing him, they had amassed hundreds of pages worth of notes, newspaper clippings, interviews and surveillance reports. But the final entry in the FBI files, to me, sums up Dante perfectly. Subject was arrested and sentenced to 2 years probation on October 28, 1965, for attempted arson by explosives in Chicago, Illinois. Subject also arrested on 24th of April 1970 for aggravated battery by the Chicago Police Department. Subject has stated that he is the most deadly man in the world.